Okay, here we are. I'm going to let the folks trickle in here. I'm excited. We've got Xylon in the house, in waiting. Xylon Genesis Otterburn. A friend of mine for a while now. I don't see them constantly, but you know how it is in these. You know how it is in these kind of scenes. People, you don't see someone for a while and they resurface. You run into each other, and it's like you never missed a beat. Has that family vibe to me. Just the underground in general. It's year after year, you just as the years go by, people, they almost get closer and closer, even when you don't see someone for a while, and you sort of get the parallel vibe, checking out what they're doing, keeping abreast of what they're about as time goes on. So I don't know, maybe are there any updates with me, really? Just put out this remix that I did for fucking Executioner's Mask that came out yesterday. I guess the little upcoming projects I have, I can't really dish on yet. But anyway, okay, so the guest today, Xylon Genesis Otterburn. Xylon is a noise musician. And actually, I don't know, they'll tell us what order that they would want the resume listed, but noise musician, thinker, writer, label head for Perfect Law tapes. And Xylon has gone under a few different monikers for their noise music, including Lycanthrope and some others. I met Xylon when they were in Richmond, Virginia, and they set up a really cool show for Psalm Zero. But it's one of these cool things. I hit up Xylon just because I heard they were doing stuff in Richmond, friend of a friend of a friend. I was like, oh, what's up? Can you set up a show? My band's called Psalm Zero. And they were like, oh, yeah, I know your stuff. I knew Extra Life from back in the day. And that's some validating shit when you, I'm trying to curse less. This is my new thing, is cursing less. This is a validating thing when you meet someone that you're interested in, you're excited about what they're doing, they seem really cool, and then they it's like the connection has already been made. It sort of gives you this really healthy sense of family, extended family. The fact that you do something and it reaches someone who you respect later, and then the respect gets handed down through the generations, and it's this lineage, this thing of ours. I'm not going to do any more an Italian impression. There's nothing more hack than a Guido impression. Anyway, word. Let me take a sip of my Spro here, and we'll get cracking with the homie, Xylon Genesis Otterburn. What's up, Zy?
How are you?
Doing all right. Doing pretty well. It's like Groundhog Day, but I'm managing to sculpt. I've got some more Skype students. I'm sculpting something time-wise.
Yeah, I hear that kind of as most things go, you get kind of a split with how people react to core. And people in our world very often, I think for a while, especially people on more my end, people who have never made a cent off of a tour in their life and are kind of joking about having done that.
I'm glad you think I make money, but yeah.
No, of course, and I know you don't, but I know that
I come out in the plus. Yeah.
When you have friends who are in bands who that's maybe not a total joke for.
Yeah.
But that's the funniest thing when quarantine started, is hearing all these people kind of be like, oh my God, what am I going to do? And it's like, you're going to do what you were doing before.
I know. Yes. Yeah.
As far as life goes, sure, there's less jobs, but the idea that this was a lucrative way to spend our time before, and that artists and musicians need some sort of stimulus, literally the farthest from the truth.
You're so right. I totally thought that it was this kind. I don't know if humble brag's the right word, but this sort of like fake despair of like, man, you know, right, like my
And
income stream. It's like your income stream of losing money on tours. Like you're actually probably coming out in the plus now that you're not like driving to fucking Ohio to play for
no,
three people,
exactly.
you know. It's like,
And it's true in so many different respects. I mean, like I did comics for a long time before I was ever like touring and doing shit like that and doing music so much. And um it's very true in the comic book industry as well. Like these people who they're kind of like hiding the fact that they have a day job.
yeah,
They really do have a day job. They really do fit in this wherever they can. But they're trying to, you know, project this image of being a writer who writes for a living. That's not true. There's almost no
yeah.
way that that's true.
Like literally making you a burrito or whatever. Like I thought
Yeah.
that was part of the romance of it, you know, and then you get into like, I don't know. I mean, weirdo classical composers always teach, you know.
Oh,
You know,
so I've been doing some unspecified work for Henry Flint, um, and because he's from right about where I'm from, but lives in New York, and I'm like amazed that he's lived in Manhattan since the '60s, like since he was hanging out with John Cage and Yoko Ono.
yeah,
And that's the thing where it's like, obviously there's no money here, but you're rent controlled.
right.
Such a weird thing, like
That's
so
old school New York. Yeah,
so hard to imagine.
yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I don't know what I would want at the top of my resume anymore.
Not musician, because I met you through music, but then
No, I mean,
people.
I think that it's been interesting. I've been doing a lot of visual art lately. I still have music coming out. I have a collaborative album with Jonathan Kennedy coming out soon, so of Death Pile, and that will be out eventually. But I've been making even music that feels very alienated from the stuff I've been touring out and doing for years. So I've been like
Yeah.
working a country record.
No
Um,
shit. I
mhm.
actually didn't know because I only know you as like just harsh noise. In fact, you're I think you're my only friend or my only friend that I talk to on this level who is like deeply embedded in like noise on that pure a level.
True.
But
Yeah.
that's sick. You're on some totally new shit. What's the country record about? Like what?
Um, well, I'm like really into old outlaw country. Like very big into like Towns Van Zandt and Terry Allen and stuff like that. And I've been making noise for the last few years about being from the South. And for a while, that was all it was. I made this record called Allemansjugend, which is just about, it's like a power electronics record about being where I'm from. And I, over the last few years, have started to play around with just doing actual song based music. And it's interesting. It's not something, I still approach it like the kind of musician I've been for the last 6 years of my life, which is things are very arranged in a DAW. I treat instruments, be them like traditional instruments like guitar and fiddle and harmonica, like I would treat sound sources for noise.
Yeah,
And then
you samples or do you
yeah.
compose it by samples? Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm like collaging stuff together from stuff I've physically performed. But it's interesting. I really am fascinated by a kind of lyrical music, even at my harshest. That, I mean, my favorite artists are still like Bjork and Kanye West. Like, I have like Kate Bush on my knuckles. It's not.
I saw that out. Yeah, Kate. Hate. I was like, what is? Yeah.
It's not something where I have. And I think if you ask noise people, many people don't think I'm very harsh. Like I think that I like make things that are heavy, but I think people tend to find that I make things that are a little pretty or emo, as you said, like very kind of old school. I used to be in Scrams bands, and that was the shit that I loved when I was a kid.
Yeah, yeah.
And
I remember. Yeah,
forever.
you actually were the one who taught me the word scrams because that's a retronym, right? I mean, because that's in my day that wasn't scrams, it was just screamo because the mall bangs scene thing hadn't happened yet, so it was just heroin, Orchid, Jerome's Dream, like that was just screamo. But now, but they had to invent scrams, right, to sort of separate it from
Well, all of
Like,
that's such a funny mess now. Not that I want to bog this down in this kind of conversation necessarily, but I I was probably teetering on mallcore as a small child in a very specific way of like really being into Fall Out Boy and My Chem at like 10, 11.
yeah,
And getting into stuff like that, to me, I was kind of barreling backwards through history and finding heavier shit.
that's
But
the
at that
way to do it.
very
Yeah.
same time, kids were codifying something else as emo entirely.
Right.
And it was more of that mallcore stuff. And so there's still some part of my mind that separates out bands that other people would write off entirely that I still think is like the real shit. Like I'm like, I'll still listen to like a Fall Out Boy record and be like, man, fuck you. Like whatever. This is but what's funny is I was on MySpace. I was a very online child, which is evident. And I was on MySpace in like 2005, 2006. And what's so fascinating to me now is that all of this like cringe shit that people were into, that's what 100 gex is. There's all these kids who are like, oh, 100 gex sounds like Charlie XCX and PC music. And I'm like, no, this sounds like the Medic Droid.
I know. Well, I don't know the Medic Droid, but I know what you're talking about. I mean, yeah. It sounds like what was cringe then, and now it's like not cringe anymore. And actually, it's interesting. Charlie XCX, I love. I am way down. So you referred to that. She would be an example of.
No, but she's like a new pop artist who is like, and that just kind of more maximal like pop radio stuff, PC music. Yeah. I think a lot of young kids weren't even really cognizant of weird, shitty vocoder pop that existed purely on the internet in the aughts. And so when they hear 100 gex, they think it's this kind of like new pop music. And what's so funny to me is it's actually the thorough line of Skrillex was in like a Warped Tour band called From First to Last.
That's right.
And it's literally like you just made the through line between those two ideas.
Yeah.
It's the exact same thing.
I know.
And I kind of like that because it has a similar weird feel to, say, Zappa at his best, where it's kind of joking and saying, who are you to be provincial about one kind of music because you're having the same emotional chemical response to all of it. Right. And it is very real where probably I grew up, my middle name is after Genesis Peorage, and I grew up on a lot of industrial, but my mom, because of the way music was in the 80s and 90s, you just went to a record store and you say, hey, I like this, and someone else gives you something else. Yep. And there was no history that you could access as just like a person in North Carolina. And so my mom was very into like Throbbing Gristle and Cabaret Voltaire and Nurse's Wound, but at the same time, very into Marilyn Manson, very into Nine Inch Nails. Like it was all the same to her.
Damn, and is your mom like, how old is your mom? She like my age or what? Like,
my mom was born 71.
Oh, okay. Right now she's like 10 years older. Word. Yeah. She's into Manson and shit. That's cool.
Yeah. She's really into Marilyn Manson. Like my dad used to hang out with Brian in Miami and weird, just like shit. Like you have, but the funny thing is that there's no real delineation. And my mom is someone who, not being around other people, like when I show her stuff, she thinks it's cool.
Yeah.
But left to her own devices, she'll just listen to whatever's put in front of her. So my mom loves Sound of Music. And so I showed her that Liebach record from 2 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
And she's like head over heels.
That's amazing. That's so cool.
It's so sick because it is very good.
Yeah.
But the thing that's so funny to me is I was listening to that stuff, and then I was listening to The Prodigy a lot. Like my earliest memories of ever dancing to music were to Firestarter at like 4 years old. But at the same time, my mom got super into the first Linkin Park record when it came out.
Yeah, no, it's as generations go on, like just things get reevaluated, or they get like considered cringe, or they get considered not cringe. I mean, I see this with younger like guitar students, like they'll know about stuff from my era, but like then they'll also like stuff that's totally cringe from my era, but they'll see it as the same. And maybe there's like a wisdom of that, you know, like I was too provincial as a kid thinking X, Y, and Z was cringe,
Well,
you know.
I think that's really what it is. Like I was re-listening to Hybrid Theory recently and listening to like some of the shitty like chintzy synths on there and the like record scratch stuff. And I was like, this sounds exactly like at the drive-in for a certain type of person.
Right.
It's the same thing, down to the weird digital effects and everything. It's just for a wider audience.
Right.
And when we bring it back to theory or anything else, I think the same game is being played all the time. And I talked about this on my Contain episode with Barrett, where people are constantly kind of playing these like it's team sports.
With philosophy and stuff.
Yeah. People who maybe beefed at the time or whatever, and they just feel like they need to pick sides or like tell me how much they love Hannah Arendt but shit on Martin Heidegger. And it's like,
well, yeah, it's like picking this like position. Yeah, I mean, or just like, I feel like for a while it was like Hegel was considered like not, I don't know, that's like dorky or like not fun or not sexy, and now it's just like this like neo-rational. It's just like, no, dude, like it's cringe not to be into Hegel. Like Nietzsche's cringe. Like I don't know. Like I'm not even. This is the thing.
One thing, you don't have to play any of those games.
Yeah,
because you don't have to sit back and play out this game of it being team sports. You don't have to say, oh, I don't like that guy, because the default setting for most experience is that there's too much. There's too many records to get around to. There's too many books to read. There's so many movies out there. And taste, I used to think taste was something that was kind of like organically, beautifully rooted in our social experiences, and they kind of guide you. But more often they seem like a formalized catalog of alibis for why you won't have to feel bad when you don't get around to all of the archive.
Okay. Say that again. Like, when you feel. Okay, no, go ahead.
No, you formalize all of the things that you don't have to feel guilt for not reading.
Oh, right, because you say something's cringe so that you can just be like, right, because you can't get to everything, so you're like, I don't even want to get to that because I know it's cringe. So, and
therefore you don't have to have the kind of the synthesist, the real person who's just like, oh, like I'm going to try to read everything and I'll get to what I can, and you can only move so fast, whatever. That person feels like a crushing amount of just like, oh shit, the archive is forever. It's totally Sisyphean. There's no way to have a totalizing like word on anything.
Yeah.
Reckoning with that, and it all comes back to formative experiences. Like I probably feel this way because I was unfortunately very into Camus as a kid, and like I want to just reckon with that absurd kind of insurmountable thing. Yeah. But I think that there's some virtue in just saying, yeah, I'm going to try, and I might not actually get that much, who knows, whatever. But I think it's so whack to say, oh, I don't need to read Nietzsche, or I don't need to read Heidegger. I know that they're racist.
Well, yeah. No, of course that's not a reason to not check these guys out. I'm interested, like, just noise wise. How does that factor in? Because like I always think of noise as being on this different cultural strand of like, is there like the same kind of vibe of like deciding stuff's cringe and like being like, oh, that's whack, we're on some new shit? Because I don't know, when I see noise, it always seems like this like monolithic realm where like things don't change. I don't mean that in like an offensive way, but it's just like this like stillness of like no one's just like, oh, it turns out White House is corny, it turns out Prurient is corny. I don't know, right? That's
the thing is, I think that it's almost similar to the way that hip hop doesn't have too much of that yet, because it's still realistically a very young genre. So you don't have this like, hip hop still has pretty much just total reverence for all of its elders. Like you look at any kid who's really rapping, even if it's entirely sounds nothing like old heads, they'll still list things like Cool G Rap and shit like that.
Yeah.
when it comes to noise, there's always going to be these people on the fringes because of all of the kind of ways in, be it like techno or having a boyfriend or girlfriend or metal or whatever.
Yeah.
There's these ways in, and then people sit on those fringes, and like Pitchfork 8 years ago or something tried to say White House sucked, and they were trying to drag my boy Omar's band, blanking, the Chicago band,
Rectal Hygienics.
Yeah, Rectal. They were trying to pull Rectal into it, and it's like, first of all, Rectal's a punk band. Rectal's a punk band with a bunch of noise dudes in it, but it's a punk band.
Actually, I gotta say that I think the article, are you talking about the article that Jess Skolnick wrote about?
Yeah.
I was into that article. I honestly, I saw that headline and I was just like, oh, what is this, trying to cancel people? And I was like, no, actually, this is legit. Anyway, we don't need to.
No. I mean, it's important for what you're asking, because I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus, but the kind of critical evaluation of any of this should kind of, I think, noise happens from a place of, there's a very small social circle. It's just enough for you to be able to tour the US.
Yeah.
But there's not much else. So there's enough people where there's someone in every major city, maybe right now, but then it's not a huge amount of people. So everyone kind of knows, and noise is one of those places where most people who are consuming the media are also making music. If you look at any other genre, this isn't happening. You don't have every punk band is also someone who's constantly going out of their way. No, most of these dudes are they have day jobs. It's part of their social circle. Yeah. And vice versa. There's a large swath of people who aren't in bands at all. And it's because the barrier for entry, even just equipment and time wise, is lower for noise.
For sure. I noticed kind of I don't know if this is your experience, but compared to other kinds of music, when I have been at a noise show or played on a bill with noise musicians, even though I don't make noise, I noticed there's less of this energy of awesome set, man, you killed it. Maybe is this a wrong impression that it's more just well, yeah, you made. This is it's like a ritual experience. It was what it was. There isn't it feels so non-hierarchical that people don't even really give it up for anyone above anyone else. Or is that right?
It's weird, because actually a lot of what that is still comes back to the fact that everybody's making stuff, and in a certain way, enthusiasm is cringe because you're looked at as a punisher. And
God,
no, it's true, and it is what it is.
But that's the most hierarchical asshole thing in the world. Someone's good set, you're oh, that's cringe. Look at this plebe trying to be on my nuts. It's but at
the same time, I think it follows from friendship first. So if you have legitimate connections with people and you're telling your friend hey, that ripped, or I have friends in my life who will DM me the next day to be hey, how was it? But they don't want to chop it up in front of a bunch of people and be oh man, did you think it was cool? And vice versa. And the reason you don't want to do that is because everybody, I don't know, it's hard because I've been very frustrated on both ends. I get a million submissions for Perfect Law, which is a barely active label of just people being hey, do you want to listen to this? And I kind of just, as a rule, have to ignore most of it, because I can't be oh, I'm going to listen to this all day. I know what I want to release. And it gets into a weird place of, I think, I don't know, it's weird. You just kind of want to talk, Christopher Forgus, he's done a lot of things, Kites. He's also a comic book dude. It's very funny because he makes noise. He's also made comics. I've known him since before he was ever doing, before I was ever into noise, just for comics. I geek out about his comics almost more than his music. He has lots of records on load or whatever. And I cannot talk to him in public about comic books. He just doesn't want to hear it. He's here to drink and play music. And it's just, I don't know. I don't really, it's weird. It is, I think when you talk about this hierarchy thing, I think that there's people who have probably more feelings than you would imagine about whole swaths of a kind of noise. Like there's people who don't like power electronics.
Right, right.
What. And then like I, for the life of me, cannot stand wall. Like I just can't.
I've never heard that expression wall. I mean, that's just where it's like really not sculpted and it's just kind of doesn't change a lot. And
correct. Yeah. Like Vomir, the Rita, stuff like that. There are records. Some of them are pretty cool. I could listen to them for about half their length.
I tend to not like that. Yeah, I mean, I like stuff. Well, you know me. I mean, I'm like all Mr. Composer dude. So I mean, to me, it's like I love harsh noise that has a bunch of. I don't even know if you call it harsh noise. I mean, that's why I like your stuff. I mean, there's just like different things going on. You know, to me, that's not like less brutal. It's like
and for me, it's interesting because the idea behind wall very often tends to be more of this kind of high-minded, like high art thing of that they're trying to like wear those clothes for a second to be like the only frontier is a lack of dynamics. Like to present dynamics to people is to say, oh, hey, I'm making a song, check it out. And I think that
God forbid, right?
No, but that's a fine, and I think that that's part of the thing is when we talk about cringe, like Barrett talks about transcendental cringe or whatever, there is something kind of just beautiful about that vulnerability. I've been learning more and more that you kind of just have to make the shit you want to make. Like I don't have any real stake in being a part of anyone's scene anymore. I moved to Providence 3.5 years ago to go where I thought the stuff was, like more stuff than I had, where a lot of kind of legends lived in my mind. And I watched that not only be gutted in real time, but I also learned that you just cannot, like you can't do that. I live in North Carolina now, and there's no music here. There's none, like not even.
Well, there is now that you're there. I mean,
right. but it's very weird because the city I live in even has as large of a population as Richmond, but it doesn't pop up in the same way. It doesn't have a skyline. It doesn't feel like that.
Yeah.
And even things that I like, you couldn't pay me to go see, like punk bands, don't exist here. And it almost makes me sad. Like it almost makes me sad that there's a music school and there's no one like doing.
Yeah, well, they're not going to do noise. Yeah. I mean, well, yeah, but then you're the guy there. What city are you in or town are you in?
Greensboro.
Oh, Greensboro. Okay. Well, so yeah. So then you're the guy or the person to hit the, for people to hit up for shows, and then I don't know. I mean, come through. I mean, I could see you can't moving to a place because there's a music scene. That would make me nervous because then it just ends.
That's what New York is.
Yeah, but New York, there's always something. I mean, certain scenes come and go, but there's always some scene that's happening. I mean, I don't.
Okay, so like I love Red Scare, right?
I do too. Yeah.
Big fan. However, when they got Hari Neff on there, it really freaked me out. Because they were, for about 10 minutes, just Hari Neff and Dasha and Anna sitting there being like, New York was so good 9 years ago when I moved.
But everyone loves to say that shit.
That's the mindset that I think needs to be obliterated from this planet. Like 1,000%. I'm starting to think nothing was cool. Like I just like, I really, that's part of like what having parents who were punks is for me. Like most of my friends, their parents are like just like kind of like straight-laced people, and as a kid my mom was still kind of like hard around the edges and just like not doing great, and my dad had kind of like cleaned up and started listening to jam bands and shit, and I started
some stuff.
Yeah, for years I would sit back and be like, oh man, my dad like sold out, blah blah blah. And now I just realized that in 1990, my parents were fashion punks. And that's all there's ever been. That's like all there has ever been. Like
is fashion punks. Everything's been cringe the whole time.
Yeah, and that's fine. I think that's kind of what's beautiful is that it's like it's totally fine, but there is no like real thing. And then be like, it's like all of my favorite punk records are not punk records because they exist pre-77. Like I listen to Funhouse and I'm like, this rules. This sounds infinitely better than the Ramones, like it just at every point.
Yeah.
It's so, and you get further back and you're just like, oh, like Link Ray and Dick Dale
is the most punk.
That's the shit. Punk. That's it. Like,
but and that might. But if you were around back then, there'd be probably reasons why that would be like cringe or commercial. Or,
no, exactly.
I mean, if you were that age, I mean, I look back on like the thing I've been looking back. I almost feel disloyal to my friends or former colleagues or whatever. But I look back at like the 2000s in Brooklyn and North Brooklyn and Williamsburg. I mean, this scene that I was so much a part of, you know, I mean, Extra Life and Z's were just embedded, like just sprung up from this. And I look back and I'm like, that was just that I was in my 20s is why that was awesome. I mean, it's really not, that wasn't like that. I mean, it was vibrant in that it was a thing that was happening, but like how many of those bands were actually good? How many of those artists are anyone going to remember? Most of the shit was just people fucking around in their 20s, and that's cool because it's fun to be in your 20s. I mean, you know.
That's why I think it's cool to cut records though, because like I love Made Flesh. I love your R. Kelly cover.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
No one else will. It's literally just like that split with Larkin is amazing because that Avenging Angel is Larkin Grimm doing Noise, and it's so sick.
It's a very I like her track.
But when you, I don't know, like you were on what Z's record were you on? New Slaves?
I was on the first Untitled one and on Arms. Like I wrote a bunch of stuff on Arms. Yeah. And and the Hard EP also.
Gotcha.
The one on
so New Slaves is the one that like blew up, right?
That's the one. That's kind of the one. Yeah.
But it's too long.
Yeah, it's live. New Slaves live was pretty on fire.
No,
I gotta say,
like, the end is flawless.
It's crazy, and I can say this because I wasn't in the band. I mean, I'm hyping up Friends now.
Like,
you know,
I like that, and then I like XE, the trio one.
Yeah, XE's nuts too.
I like that really a lot, but it's this weird thing of I kind of. You mentioned Prurient earlier, and it's like that's a really funny thing of. You're posing if you pretend that you don't like a lot of those records.
Right.
You're also posing if you pretend to like a lot of these new records.
Right.
It's both true.
Right.
Probably never a time in my life in which I would have enjoyed being in a room with Dominic. That's just not, like, I wouldn't have had fun. Yeah. But at the same time, like, History of AIDS is incredible.
I have that one,
just, and even the like synth pop stuff he does, that's fine for me. Like that's the Times Arrow, the one on Hydra Head, great.
Yeah.
But I can't. It's just weird. You get into these things of people. I don't know if like I think Noise is mostly a very in time. Like if you're talking about what's cringe, you're talking about someone else's success.
Okay.
Or someone else like in your space.
That's like micro success though, man. I mean, for Noise.
I know, but that's the thing. Is it's like, what do you have? And this is the joke to me constantly is that like selling 200 copies of a tape is a real feat. And it's not a joke. Like it's a real feat because you can't just do it.
Yeah.
Like
Noise.
You could try, you can't just do it. And I think that it's a funny thing because all I want with anything now, when I was a kid, I wanted to write and draw comics for a living. And I wanted to be just given Batman or something and like do it for a living. But now the things that I want to make, I kind of just want to see if I can get maybe like 80% saturation of my intended audience.
Okay. With music or art? Because I was going to also ask. I was going to ask also just about other stuff you're doing. Maybe we could pivot away from music because I mean, we know each other talking like a lot of theory and philosophy and stuff, but I'm actually not super familiar with what you've kind of, I don't know, just your history with the engagement with that. And you sent me that new essay, which was so cool. But that's the only thing I've read of your, like, I don't.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, like, and just, I was speaking more broadly about this idea of saturation where like, I don't want to, comics get published in like hundreds of thousands and they go to the direct market or whatever. And it's like, I don't know if I want to make a book that gets printed a lot and then only some people read. I'd rather print as many as there is demand, and then like I'll print it again or whatever else. Like I've been, and I think that that's a nice thing that tapes and like noise has given me, is this idea of like, why would I make 300 records?
Right, right.
Why
Well,
would I
it's
make?
yeah. Well, it's like same thing with playing a show. I mean, I would rather play at a small venue and pack it than play
Yeah,
at some bigger place and have it be like empty and weird. And it's like
yeah,
it's a
and
bad look.
totally. And I think that, so I'm theories similar. I mean, what even? That's a place where success is also entirely marginal. I look
I
at
don't even get the funny thing with theory is I don't know what I'm even trying to like quote unquote do. I mean, I'm just like a fan with that, like I'm not
yeah.
I have no intention of like I wrote that essay, we're going to put out or whatever, but I don't have any aspirations to like be like a player in that scene, but I mean like
I mean,
do
look at
you
what success is. It's Mark Fisher.
Mark
Like,
Fisher is success. I would say having a book on urbanomic. See, this is how skewed my thing is to
no,
me.
I
Like,
agree. I
you
agree.
agree to me having a book
No,
on
absolutely.
urbanomic
I
is
mean,
like that.
ergonomic is. I'm salivating for X-Risk.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
very
For
excited.
for which?
Thomas Moynihan's X-Risk.
Okay,
It's
I don't really. Yeah.
it's it's just went up for pre-order, but his last book, Spinal Catastrophism, is one of my favorite things I've read in the last few years.
Wow.
But I love Urbanomic, and I think that that's success, but I also know that all these dudes are like teaching at New Center, which means
I.
they can't be making any
Oh
money.
yeah, no. That's the PhD version of barista shit. I mean,
Well,
essentially. I mean, it's not in a bad way. It's just day job stuff.
sure, and I think that that's what's kind of funny is I look at how little. So in theory, amongst continental kids, which are like the cool kids, because analytic is what most universities teach and like staff,
Do
right?
they? I didn't actually even really because
Yeah, so
when I
like,
was doing undergrad, it was all continental. I mean, I didn't read any like Wittgenstein or anything.
interesting. So
It was
like a
all
lot
just
of,
Foucault,
I mean, yeah, you're getting like these kind of, not the like philosophy of the mind, like mind body problem analytic people, is like what I have understood most university staff. And then you get like, I mean, to actually, it's why it's a joke to have a PhD and say you studied Deleuze, because you're basically an autodidact. Because
You
there's
have
no
to be. Yeah, there's
Deleuze.
no formal way to do that. Yeah.
Exactly. And so what's funny to me is that analytic is actually kind of getting, specifically because of Reza
I
Negarestani's.
was gonna say I'm becoming a Reza fan. Reza is
Well,
cool.
well, Reza's like, his last book, Intelligence and Spirit, is kind of really making this huge appeal to like people that have been entirely written off, like Rudolf Carnap and stuff. And just these kind of like mathematical, hyper analytic, like almost obliterating the existence of a metaphysics in their philosophy.
Yeah, with
And
logic, like actual logic, as in
yeah,
A and B. It gets into the stuff that I don't have a head for because it's not all poetic and flowery and French
exactly,
and like rock and
exactly.
roll. But I mean, I could use a little rigor,
Well,
in
and
that regard.
that's what's funny though, is like you get these kind of people, like there's a push of back and forth, but then all the resources are still going to analytic. So like, how can you be a bad boy within a small circle of something that also is like the most funded? It's like a weird dialectic, right? And you
Right.
get this kind of burrowing thing of, I don't understand the university system or how that would make any sense for doing this stuff. Like I can only do theory because I'm not in school.
Right.
And I'm
Yeah.
consistently more and more in this place of feeling like, I was a reluctant Bernie supporter in 2016. I was a reluctant Bernie supporter until a few months ago. And one of the things that I dislike the most about his platform is calls for like free education, because you can't. There's two things. First of all, you would have a mandatory draft in this country because you wouldn't have a volunteer military if people could afford to go to college.
Oh, okay. Yes.
And
Interesting.
then
Okay.
at the same time,
I never even thought of that.
if you have if you have university free, it's still worthless. It's still worthless except in like 4 or 5 fields.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. Well, I mean, academia is just being liquidated in general, like
right,
especially the humanities, which is kind of why I mean I like the whole like you're saying, just the whole like well, you didn't say sued, but like the whole like sued theory cell scene. I mean, just this like non-academic reading of Deleuze. That's why I love it because I see it as this runoff from like
or it
just a
could be
failing. It's like people jumping like a sinking ship and just being like, we're gonna do our own thing,
right.
you
And
know?
this is, I mean, I think that for me, it gets into this place of like college. I legitimately believe time is a resource, and not only would I not go to school unless it was free, but I wouldn't go to school unless they paid me, because that's my work I'm doing. Like, you should be
Right.
paying me for my time and my work. I'm not going to go to school for what? I
Well, if
can
you're
read
not,
on my own.
yeah, well, yeah. I mean, if the degree is not getting you anything, especially like
Exactly.
philosophy
And
and stuff,
in most of
but
these fields, just a bachelor's won't. I
yeah,
mean, you look at, I was at restaurants when I was 18 years old with people with anthropology bachelors, and it's like, what did you do? Like, you
yeah,
have
yeah, yeah.
names. And it's like,
Well,
if you really want to support people, if you want something free, like, make trade school free.
yeah, 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 totally.
Destigmatize that shit.
Well,
Like
this
that.
is why I love this like this sort of gentleman amateur vibe though. That's happening of just like theory. I mean, this sort of like armchair intellectual thing. I mean, I think a lot of the great philosophers of all time had day jobs, right? I mean, we're talking about day jobs. I mean, wasn't Descartes just some guy just like I mean, right?
Yeah,
It's like
there was no formal job to something like that until
right,
very
professional
recently anyway.
philosophy. Yeah.
But when you're talking about, it's interesting. So like, I'm even very interested in kind of like, once again, we're talking about these scenes and these postures and hierarchicalization and the social and how we're kind of, peacocking with each other. Althusser, who, unfortunately murdered his wife, wrote a memoir
Really? I did not
after
know that.
he wrote a memoir after he killed his wife, and he went to an insane asylum for this murder. And when he went to the insane asylum, he wrote a memoir called "The Future Lasts a Long Time," and it's one of my favorite pieces of writing. And most of the time, he's just saying, "Hey, man, most of my books that I've not just on my bookshelf, but that I have cited, I've only read enough to cite."
That's so
And
real. That's so honest. I love
that's
that.
where this like gentleman sued thing is so funny, because it's just true for everyone.
I know
Like,
that's what kind of I mean that's what's exciting me because it's like even though I have no aspirations to do anything in philosophy except kind of like make little points on the internet and do live streams and run my mouth, I still I'm almost like getting over this imposter syndrome because I see these people where I'm so impressed by how much they've read. I mean, very impressed, but I know that they haven't read as much as they seem. And then I'm like, wow, actually, like I'm as smart as these people. I just am putting in
sure.
less time, and I'm like, this is cool. I can sort of,
No, and
read a little less, and I don't feel like there is. I mean, there is a hierarchy in that some people are smarter than other people, and then some people have read more. But there is an open-endedness to this theory scene that I just find really inviting, and I feel like I have a weird marginal little micro place in it from a musician angle on the side. Like I don't know.
it's, I mean, you speaking of that hierarchy, it's one of the things that is so infuriating about the like neoliberal mindset is the idea that like your worldview is a clear kind of matter of fact extension of like a material reality. And if you simply are intelligent enough, you'll come to your ideas as a matter of fact, like as almost common sense. Whereas though when you get into theory, you have to recognize that there are extremely well-read Nazis and extremely not well-read communists. And I think a lot of both of those groups are wrong.
Yeah.
But like, it's not as simple as one thing or the other. And, my history with theory, I think is probably similar to you. I was very impressed by a lot of the like more poetic aspects of certain thinkers. I was reading a lot of philosophically tinged literature when I was a kid. So I was very into like Kafka and Camus in middle school. And then I got away into like their essays and stuff like that. I've been flirting with being a communist since I was about 12.
I want to get to that, maybe not right away, but yeah, we got to get to communism. Yeah.
No, of course, yeah. Some of our first exchanges were political, like kind of almost lures between us when we first met. Of you being like, "Oh, and I'm like, "Yeah."
Well, you were like you were the first. This was like 2016 when I crashed with you, and I was like, I just saw you took your shirt off for the thing, and I was like, hammer and sickle. All right, like because I just was. That was like just when I was like becoming aware of like alt-right stuff and that whole 2016 like meme wars and whatnot. And I just was I was like, okay, so there are people who are more Nazi-ish than I thought. And then so you were a person I was like, oh, okay, that's the other mass murderer that some people apologize for.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm breaking balls here, so maybe
you're fine.
Set that straight. But like, yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing. I remain not super political, except just basic human reactions to seeing human suffering and being sickened by it and wanting it to stop.
Well, that's the thing.
But that's
shown that is a profoundly political stance.
It is. I mean, it is, but it's like
unfortunate who decides to show you that and when.
Right, and I mean, for what purpose? And then, I mean, you can have an emotional. I mean, this is what we were talking about, just the sort of politics that come out of just pure like affect or whatever. I mean, because it's weird for me that like political. I like it, but it is weird to me how when I got into theory, like in college, it wasn't it was political, but it was more like describing the way things work rather than. So it's like, when I got into Marx. Or when I'm still not even that deep into Marx, but I read Marx not in the context of like the Communist Manifesto. I read it in terms of like Capital and just this descriptive diagnosis of what's going on, not like an agenda. So,
well, I mean, in general, a big thing that I constantly would advocate for is a delineation, a hard delineation to be made between diagnostic and prescription, because you find that you disagree almost with no one 100% of the time if you're willing to say, oh, that person has a fine point about how things are.
Yeah, objective and descriptive
I don't
and
think
diagnostic.
What they should do is what they say we should do isn't what I think we should do.
Yeah. Well, this is what we talked about. I mean, this is why, it's like you're online. There's just so much stuff being said, and you've got like some like utterly a person I would consider maybe like a vile racist who's like the only person noticing some hypocrisy or bullshit in the statements being made by people who are wonderful, good-hearted people. So it's like you end up. Someone with a terrible agenda, but they have a diagnosis of something where you're like, they're describing a factual reality, even if their intentions are what I would consider bad.
Putting it into a certain type of way of thinking is very useful. So I think like putting it into terms that someone else can understand is super useful. And that's part of the work of the diagnostic as well. Like it's fine to sit back and say, oh, well, this is how things are, but you've got to be able to potently lay out what the problem is. And I think that that's like constantly my position on climate is, oh, wow, like you're right, but you don't make a very good point about why we should do anything about it.
Well, you mean climate, like literally climate change?
Climate change, yeah, absolutely. Where so much of it is like deeply eschatological, in which they are also, oh, like we basically deserve it. And it's like,
people jerk off to apocalypse a lot now. I mean, I try to avoid that because I can't, and fetishizing the violence going on. It's hard for me though, because I am like a sort of hysterical type person, and I do naturally get off on catastrophic stuff. So then it's like you get it's like I see George Floyd getting killed, and then I see a police station burning down. Of course, on an affective level, I'm like, hell yeah, dude, burn that police station down. But then I'm like, dude, you're jerking off to like more suffering. Like it's actually not cool, I don't know.
No, absolutely. And I think that, I mean, like when I did my contain, it was very much like things had just popped off, and I had just moved to North Carolina, and I think it's very hard also just optics wise, socially, and also within like rhetorically, things have been set up where saying you oppose certain things just sounds bad.
Yeah, it just implies that you must think X, Y, and Z if you think A, B, and C.
Absolutely not.
Yeah,
It's
but
like,
yeah. By the way, Xylon's talking about Contained is the podcast that they were on recently, which is the podcast of Barrett Avner, who I had. He was the first live stream that I had on
didn't
here.
know it was your first.
Yeah, yeah, and I actually got, and I was actually reminded, like, oh, I gotta ask Xylon to be on, because I was listening to Contain, Barrett's podcast, and I was like, that voice sounds familiar. I was like, that's my homie. I want to get them on there. Anyway, sorry, keep going. You were saying,
so it's just the optics of even like what you're opposed to is really hard. Like the same way that the hammer and sickle optics are like, oh, you really like that the Yugoslavians were starved? And it's like, we can talk about it. We can chop it up if you want. But like, you know, at the same time, it's very hard to be against certain political movements right now without the implication basically just being, oh, you hate them. And it's like, I know, I really don't. But at the same time, I don't have a whole lot of affinity for anyone who's like LARPing, period.
right.
I have no, if you were to ask me what you can do next week, I would tell you the point is that there is no good option provided to you.
Yeah.
And that's it, to not despair in the face of that is the hard work.
Well, I mean, it's like the Zizek thing. He's just like, there's nothing to do now but think, like you shouldn't act, think. I mean, so many people would just be like, that is the most bougie, privileged, asinine. I mean, there's so many people that would just...
There would be people with trust funds saying that. There would be people with trust funds saying that. I mean, you literally look at the last 10 years of where the social ticker has gone, and it's like problems of the campus. Okay, well, problems of the campus for people who can afford to go to campus.
Yeah, well,
like there's exported to people who can't afford.
I know. Well, there is this myth, or this sort of romantic myth, that like supposedly all poor people are like these righteous like activists, when in fact, like if you ask like a random cross section of like underclass people, there a lot of people are just going to be like, I don't really give a fuck.
But this like on my shoulder, I can sit with a dude at a gas station and chop it up, and he has like a rebel flag on his car, and like there's nothing. But
what do you mean there's nothing? Like there's no
like animus. There's no like, oh fuck you. Like it's just, what's up, dude? And you can talk.
Yeah.
And that kind of like lack of good faith that people have at all turns is so corrosive, because if you get online or you get into like a kind of like metropolitan area, people will really, really fuck with you.
Yeah. No, well, adjacent, enabling, engaging, platforming, making concessions, laundering, and there's a whole rhetoric, around
the funniest thing about like, I mean, right-wing people, libertarian-minded people, theoretically should be all for like YouTube deplatforming people because it's like a business is right. But
yes, well, that's such hypocritical. That I mean, that is, yeah.
But it's the right-wing people who have started to sit back and be like, hey, maybe there's no distinguishment between Google and the government, when Google should basically be a public utility and isn't.
Right. You know, this coming full circle.
If there's no other forum, this is the thing.
Yeah.
And this is the space for that. So when I got into theory, it was largely an appeal through literature. I was really into Burroughs. I got really into just fucked up shit. I was
I'm returning to Burroughs through Fisher, actually, thinking of him as a cybernetic thinker.
No, totally.
Addiction as cybernetics and
no, and that's, I mean, like I was, you know, I obviously had Jen in the back of my head constantly, and Jen was super close with Brian Geisen and was a huge fan of Burroughs. And so I had a lot of that, and I had this like underpinning, but you have to recognize, like with theory or anything else, it's a muscle. And if you put it down for a while, you're not doing it. And like theory is not cool in like noise. Like theory is really, like you can talk about like Bataille
Yeah, that's like the only one. It's like Bataille, Nietzsche, and then like Mishima, who's like
No, and
absolutely
Mishima,
my homie. Dude, Mishima is so
of course, like, but like Mishima's like, what is that's like all of the swords on the table, you know? Like
right.
everyone can get behind Mishima, even though like he would have fucking murdered half of these people. Like he's
Well,
deep. It's like it's fine for like twinks. It's fine for like leftists and right people. Like all of them can get behind Mishima because once again, you can't play team sports with people who weren't even consistent within themselves.
right,
Like,
right.
I could just be like, oh, like old Deleuze, young Deleuze, like versus each other all day. But because they're a single person, you back them like it's a whole team. Every thinker should be contradicting themselves constantly.
I know. Well, that's being rich. You know, that's being like an actual subject. There's some good questions in the comments, but I want to get to them later. I usually like to do questions later in there.
Okay.
But as far but let's come back to like your actual communism though, because
Sure.
not pushing you to disavow Stalin, just assuming that you're not into millions of people getting killed. Like what does it mean to you to be a communist? Because the few people that I talk to and I'm friends with who say that they're communists or use that word, I think it does mean different things to what it means. Like, I mean, do you know Bryn Nibor?
No.
Oh, I think you would like Bryn a lot. She's very very cool. Slightly different scene, but very
Sure.
much like a communist. And yeah, and then Justin Murphy.
Yeah.
Lately he's been using the word less. He may be drifting away, but he for a while was calling
I
himself a
hope he's not.
communist.
I hope he's not. I think it's extremely easy and extremely lazy to have your socially conservative views construed as you being right wing, and then to have those things it would be extremely easy for him to say, oh, I'm actually probably more right wing for his base and for who his audience is.
He could be, yeah, he could, but
And I
he's
think
pulling it elsewhere.
important that he doesn't do that because it is very important to stand in this long lineage of, people like Christopher Lasch who want people to eat, but also think like some things are really fucking dumb and you shouldn't transvaluate all traditions. All traditional values can't be transevaluated. It's important.
Yeah. Some social conservative like sympathies on some level. Is that where you're at? Are you social? I mean, no, really?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, it's weird. I think that there's some things you can't move the ticker on. So like I think conservatives fight a losing battle every 10 15 years against the next thing. Like one day you're going to need conservative trans people, so you got to shut up. The same way that like 20 30 years ago you look at someone like Strom Thurmond and it's like, he's at the kind of last guard of like conservatives who were not down for any of the shit that is now. And it's like right now many Republicans would love to have like a gay Republican like vice president or something, like they're fine. There's some things that you just can't stop that wave from coming. I have some socially conservative views. Some of those things just come from I'm queer and I hate almost all queers I've ever met. I hate most people who just are preoccupied with identification and identity and just like individualizing. And it's a very small-minded, young-minded kind of thing. And it's fine. But as you get older, you should just kind of say, oh, wow, like there are real people and real things to have affinity over. And this isn't that.
Labels and the identity and just
it's
language.
So like, oh, like I don't like labels, but legitimately, I just there's so many ideological inconsistencies amongst like say the gender discourse. So you have gender abolitionists over here who believe that none of this shit means anything. It shouldn't mean anything. We can just get rid of it.
Like just everyone's going to be they in the future, like just essentially non-binary for all. And then
sure,
is that the vibe?
But I find like, I find many cis straight people to be legitimately less preoccupied with gender than many queer people. And it's like, wow, these people seem freer than you.
I find it boring, honestly. I mean, it's a boring topic to me.
No, exactly. That's sort of the thing is like I get into this place of just like it's such a whack and corny thing. Like I've worked in factories. I don't mind if people see me as a man. I know how I present, and I don't really care. I've been married for almost 4 years.
Oh, I didn't know you were married. That's good.
Yeah, so I've been married for almost 4 years. I very much am a natalist. I want children.
Okay.
And I have this very specific kind of, just like I have a lot of, I would say operatively, I have a lot of Lashian, culturally conservative views, not in the sense of wanting things to be, there's no tradition to return to.
Yeah.
But,
That nostalgic NRX reactionary thing that is cringe, even though I understand the impulse, but it's just like.
But like, if you want to talk about things that were better, I would love for breadwinner households to be an option again.
Yes.
And that doesn't mean that it needs to be women who go back home. I don't care who it is. I just want the ability for a single income to pay for a 4-person family. And as women entered the workforce, it very much masked a lot of the inflation that happened up and through the Volcker shock. And so you have a ton of people entering the workforce. No one's realizing that it's no longer a choice or a right to work that you've earned, and now you have no option other than to be a prole. Like,
this is a very interesting, this is the kind of perspective that I find really interesting. Yeah, like this thing of like where freedom and liberation is like, oh yeah, you have the freedom to now be sucked up into this world of work and corporate, it's like, oh, you get to be, you don't have to be exploited in a patriarchal way. You can now be exploited in a capitalist way, like, or whatever.
If capital decodes everything, patriarchy is a farce.
Right.
And white men from middle America were the canary in the coal mine, and we're getting told to code 15 years ago. So why would you imagine that a system that constantly decodes everything and is just trying to like strip you of your basic human rights for a profit? Why would you imagine that system has is betting on has a horse in the race? Like, it really could not care less.
Well, capitalism has no ideology other than profit.
Which is like
it doesn't like patriarchy or hate patriarchy. It's just whatever it can grind up.
It doesn't care, and it's going to be too late for many people by the time they realize that actually right now white women are the alpha consumer of capital, and soon enough it will be not white people. That's fine, but it's just true, and it's very weird because when you get into these kind of issues, it's like, oh, what do you think, women should go home and make a sandwich? And it's like, no, you have to understand, I cook every night for my household. I do that. The big psyop of having an argument around that is that was the last time that was in any way compensated. Like, Donna Haraway would call this kin work. Taking care of children, taking care of older people in your family, cooking, cleaning, all of that. Now you have no choice but to work, and also someone has to do all of that. And you definitely don't make enough money to pay someone else to do it for you. So you still have to make a sandwich.
Right.
Whether it's for yourself or for your partner or whatever else. It's just you also can't afford you're not compensated for that. At one point, work was a broader term. This is why return to tradition fools are fucking idiots, because when you get into what tradition, because if you're looking at people like Ernst Jünger and Bach,
I'm reading Jünger now. I'm super
which thing?
Umsfeld. I'm looking at it right now. It's like right there. Yeah,
it's so good. So
it's really good, especially for now. I'm trying to be an anarch, like big time. Just retreat. Like, I'll be over here if you need me, but.
So when like people like that, when we're talking about like the old world, we're talking about people who saw the nuclear family as an obliteration of morality. We saw it as people that was a time in which modernity was actually ruining tradition. And now modernity is the tradition that many like idiots online are like, hoping for. Like
Right,
they
right.
pull the clock back to there. It's the same issue with primitivists. Okay, which millennia BCE would you like?
Yeah. It's been changing the whole time. I mean, just because you don't believe in just because I don't believe in progress doesn't mean I believe in regress to some specific like romanticized fantasy. I'm interested. So I'm loving all this stuff about like, you know, not necessarily socially conservative, but open to aspects. But so like as far as like communism being vehemently anti-capitalist, and hey, I'm not an ideologue, but what I understand capitalism to be, I have come to understand it as a scourge, as like the undoing of humanity. So I am on that tip. But on a positive level, not just on some anti-capitalist, but on a positive level, what do you have a sense of what communism like would look like, or do you have like visions of, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
not like what it's not, but like how it goes down. Is it like state enforced, or is it more anarcho? Like we all have to evolve into the kind of people that like.
I hate any form of anarchism. I think that the political compass, Kantbot says this super well. The political compass is like any other compass. It's oriented towards something. If you look at a compass in the forest, it's oriented towards the north. The political compass is oriented towards the center. So everything, it's like a Hot Wheels track. You send the cars out and they always come back to the middle. And anarchism is entirely incompatible with communism. I am a big state socialist, even if I am not a fan of the big socialist states that have existed over the last 100 years. When we talk about Stalin or anything else, it's very easy to toe the kind of milquetoast line, which I will be repeating of, look, man, I don't believe CIA lies about all of the regimes that have existed that clearly just benefit American statecraft, but I also am not a fan of any of those regimes. But like, if you're gonna ask me like whether or not I mourned Fidel Castro, who like, fucking brought the literacy rate up from practically 0 to 90%, I'm gonna say there's no way I would miss that person less than any American president. And this is what's so funny is communism takes a lot of the responsibility for the social and for social well-being. So you can run up your tallies of the death toll of communism. You can't run the tallies of the death toll of capitalist poverty.
I know. I think I've kind of thought about that, right? Because you can't like measure it as much. Just someone, someone doesn't have like great health care and they kind of get sick and they die before they should have, and then the kid's fucking traumatized and goes off and gets on drugs. I mean,
it's what COVID is. You're literally looking at a thing that primarily exists for vectors that already were horrific. You want to look at where COVID deaths are happening the most? It's in nursing homes. You want to look at how many people die in nursing homes who didn't need to? It's always fucking horrible. And it's really weird to me because at least that, like, the things that I hate the most about Stalin are like state capitalist things. Like those are the things that I think are the real failings of those regimes. I'm not here for genocide, and I'm actually probably a less violently revolutionary person than most people. Like most communists have these kind of like ideations about, I can't. I don't believe in it. It's why I even have a hard time coming around on the Second Amendment thing that people like Barrett, you get these left people who are like, well, if you don't nut up or shut up, they're going to. And it's like, there's literally no way to win a gunfight.
Yeah, but you don't like guns. That you seem like you'd be a gun person. I think I like guns quite a bit. I'm applying for a California driver's license right now just so I can tool up.
Yeah, no, I can't. I come from a lot of rednecks who carry. I understand that perspective. For me, I personally, you look at someone like Christopher Dorner, and it's like. Christopher Dorner was the police officer from California who was the big black man with the bald. He was former military and he was gunning down police officers.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And he was extrajudicially murdered on American soil. Yeah. And like, you can't tell me that there's even if you're talking about your militia or anything, there's no way the American government couldn't just send a drone.
Yeah.
Like if you think of insurrection, you need to think at a level that isn't going to get your ass treated like a Yemeni wedding. Like you can't, like Obama would murder you. You don't understand how much of a threat you are.
Well, I mean, I have no LARPing fantasies about overthrowing anything.
No,
I mean,
of course.
I just am like,
No, I understand it.
I find guns to be non-toxic, and
No, I get it.
I'm ready to have it in the house just simply to defend.
Yeah.
Because I mean, it's the way things are heating up. It's like I don't know if it's gonna be, Patriot Prayer or Boogaloo Boys or
Sure.
Antifa who's just coming through the door for no reason. But
I see that's the fantasy to me is like I think I'm very committed to anything that I do. So if I was very into guns, I'd be at the range. And I think that if you're not, you're not. And I think that a lot of people think guns are 10 paces and draw. But like the weapon that someone who enters your home has is preemptive, like fucking, like premeditation.
Yeah.
They know they're entering your home.
No, I know.
You know that. And that's what's, for me, it's like, I hate to be like, hey, here's my address, like run up on me. But I don't, at a certain point, I just believe it's a cope to think that you could win.
I could see that. Yeah. I don't want to LARP. I don't want to LARP with guns.
No,
but just as far as like, so you're into like the idea of like state communism. I mean, so
yeah.
What I don't even know enough about the history of communism to know what kind of control we're talking about. I mean, what so-called freedoms would be given up? Like, are we talking like everybody, everyone's completely provided for economically, but you can only have 2 kids max? Or, I mean, are there like what measures?
No one in this country is having children, period. There are more pets in homes than like children. So that's just like, I would rather ban pets than I would cap children, because right now we're having the issue of the people who do have kids have 5, and the people who don't have kids like just like fucking decide to live with a cat or a dog, which I think is abhorrent. But like,
really,
yeah, absolutely. Cat people are better than dog people, but I love animals.
Dude, oh, you're killing me here.
No, it's true. It's true. Polya and Deleuze talk about it as well, where the dog person is a fascist who wants to, who wants a more submissive thing that can't leave. In my mind, it's always just like, my grandfather was a veterinarian. I've sat in on a lot of surgeries, and I like animals a lot. I lost a lot of pets when I was a kid, and a lot of that's like, personal from being like poor and shit. But I'm a deep natalist. So I obviously, sure, you can cap something, but I actually am not a big fan of the idea that populations get too big. Like I'm not worried about some critical mass. So when we're talking about personal freedoms, it's once again an issue of we formalize and think about our freedoms wrong. So you have a freedom to go to work. You don't have a freedom to not go to work. You have a freedom to do this or that, but like, can you do it? Like, is it like and this is the issue where like, I'm not pro-life, but I'm more skeptical of the pro-choice crowd more and more as I get older, just because of a lot of their rhetoric freaks me the fuck out.
Let's not even get into it.
Sure.
But I think the way I'm completely pro-choice, but I think the way people talk about abortion is utterly pathological.
No,
it is demented, and I'm down. I'm down with choice. I'm down with it being legal. But socially, it's deranged.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg went on record and said, hey, I supported Roe because we especially would want that to be an option for communities we wouldn't want too many of.
We shouldn't go there, but like we both know that Planned Parenthood is based in eugenics. Like we know this.
No, and this is liberal ideology and liberal economics. John Maynard Keynes was a eugenicist. He was like a president of a eugenicist club. Like it's demented. So when you get into this stuff, it gets so weird because for me, it's just you have a choice. And this is where like the pro-life crowd are super retarded because you get into the space of someone being like, oh, like I want them to have a life. And it's like, okay, cool. Me too. I want them to have a life. I want the option of a life, like a life where they don't starve.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And that's that once it's there, it's off the table. And for me, freedoms are just a very funny way to list things that I don't even like this kind of healthcare is a fundamental human right. It's like nothing's a fundamental human right. You're in a place of bargaining. You need to fucking, like, if you have demands, you have demands. It doesn't matter if it's a human right. You have demands.
This is interesting because I kind of, one of the things that sort of seduces me about certain like far right, just conceptual things, again, not the agenda, but the concepts, is really questioning like, well, you know, human rights are not a fact. I mean, we can, I mean, you can aesthetically, you can aesthetically feel like it is wrong for people to not have X, Y, and Z rights, but it's not a fact. It's an opinion.
Well, I mean, this is the thing for me, though, is like, I think you can use that pose of saying like these things should be expanded to also being human rights, which I would be like access to water, food. I believe these should be rights, but all I mean by that is they should be mandatory. I don't think it's a question. Yeah. We produce everything. And that means we're in a high bargaining position. And the histories that I'm interested in are not just redneck was originally a term for Southern communists. It doesn't mean having a mean having a sunburn. It was from red kerchiefs.
I did not know that. This is okay, interesting.
So you get into like places in West Virginia or like Cripple Creek where coal miners had physical bloody standoffs with the US government over labor disputes. And it's like, it's such a fucking psyop to even pretend that like communism is some like far-flung European ideology. It's like they were here. There were labor activists here who were bargaining for their livelihoods here. And to me, that's like a lot of what I want to embolden is this idea that it's as American as apple pie to deeply fight for your ability to be fairly compensated for your labor. And to me, many of the things that we argue are like our personal freedoms as Americans are actually like deeply corrosive. So the option to like shop for yourself in a world where you can have like all of these options, but the options that are being kept from you are entirely like hidden. Like you even think about what else might be an option because it doesn't have a box. And that's what freaks me out is like when you have concerns, and I hate to push it back at you, but like what even are the concerns? Like what do you believe the limitations of not having capital would be? Because to me, most of my prescriptions come to transitionary issues. Like I know what I want the world to be like in 500 years, but I can't have a conversation with most people because most people don't believe we have 500 years, which I think is ridiculous. It's a huge issue. But like the biggest trick that's been played on any of us is that we believe, oh man, it's going to be 20 years is the long term. It's like, I
think that's ridiculous. Yeah. This apocalyptic stuff. I mean, that's where I start to get kind of red pilled about climate change, where people are. I'm like, I believe it's real, but people are just. They were like, we have 100 years, no 50, no 20. It's like this competitive game for how much hysteria that people can whip up.
And
just like you're disempowered.
The only way you can get out of it is if you even have a 100-year plan. Which is once again like the only way we could remotely stop climate change or do what needs to be done is with large socialist like statecraft. You would have to have huge projects that employ the whole nation to move towards a better future. And if you don't do that, sure, we're signing away our rights, but we're signing our own like death certificate on the back of believing that like we needed some choice in the matter. If there's no choice, like it's constantly we're selling people their idea of their own responsibility in a climate crisis that is entirely fixable by just fucking taxing and regulating.
Yeah. Well, this is something. I mean, like I've heard like just Zizek talk about this, where it's just like this sort of this like privatizing of the political, where it's like it's on us to like recycle or buy the right eco-friendly green thing. It's like that shouldn't be my job. Like someone above should be taking care of this for me.
Do you have concerns about it democratically? Like, that's an issue a lot of people have, is this kind of their association with the regimes is that they're dictatorial.
Well, that was my next question, because I wasn't really voicing my own concerns. I was more just voicing what a standard concern would be over communism, because to me, again, being someone who does not have clear ideas about what should be done, capital W, I mean, I'm so into questioning democracy from every angle. Like, I mean, just simply because it's one of the few things that you get taught as a kid that is just received wisdom that you just absolutely did not arrive at. I mean, it's just assumed. It's like when monarchy was overthrown, things just got better, and now democracy is obviously the best of all possible worlds. Fascism and communism, those failures prove that democracy must be the best. So you must be into some kind of what people would call dictatorial, right? Or authoritarian? No.
So I would consider myself, like, if we're looking at the compass, like, it's off the map left. But then, like, I'm pretty equidistant from things like ANCOMs and what would be called tankies on the internet. So I'm not very interested in this, like, Mao, Stalin kind of LARP thing. However, I think that the democracy conversation is a really interesting one, but I think it's a bit of once again, like, it's a controlled opposition, like, it's a false dichotomy. So people are like, oh, like, I want democracy. And then there's these people who are like, well, maybe we don't deserve to make the decisions. We're not smart enough. And these are like mold bug type people who ultimately want like a patchwork or whatever else. The issue is I would argue democracy is extremely important and that it's never been done. So there's all sorts of like small little reforms we could make to our like everyday voting system, right? You could do like ranked choice, which is a great thing. It means that if you had a second best option and things aren't an option of, oh, there's a yes or a no. It's okay, I wanted this guy next if I can't have that guy. And these things are collated. Now that's great, because that means that you don't get Biden or Trump, because Biden was no one's favorite candidate at the debates, right? Like, no one was excited for him. He's a coalition of a bunch of Pete and those kind of voters. So what gets weird is I'm an extreme fan of what's called sortition. So basically democracy by lottery. So say a huge issue in kind of modern id poll is representation, right? I have huge issues with the idea of representation. First of all, you look at someone like John Lewis, who marched in the 60s and was with the civil rights movement, and he was a corporate DNC shill for the last 30 years of his life. Okay, cool. So you got a black guy from the marches. That's awesome. You know why you got a black guy from the marches? Because he was one who wasn't radical enough to get shot.
Yeah, well, yes, black faces in high places.
Exactly, and of course, I'm like
Cornell
all
West
over that wall, like Walter Ben Michaels, Adolf Reed shit, right? But when you look at things like AOC, which is like someone who's LARPing as a bartender, LARPing as lower class, absolutely just like kidding everyone. Like, that is the face of. That is what Hillary Clinton is going to look like in 20 years.
Dude, not to be like, did you see that that tiny clip, that AOC deepfake porn clip?
No.
It is very disturbing. BAP posted it. Now it went away. It's been scrubbed from the internet. It is not sexy. It is absolutely skin crawling. Anyway,
she's also just like a horrendous looking person.
I disagree, but in any case, yeah. So.
I get really mad when people want her feet pics, because like, as a foot fetishist myself, I don't think they're cute feet.
Hey, have you seen her feet? Does she do open toe like press conferences?
If you go back enough on the Instagram.
You're like digging. You're like,
someone has done that digging, and I have benefited from finding out that it is not good. It's like one of the funniest things when these anti-red scare people are like, "You're just jealous of her looks." It's like, first of all, you guys are all real misogynists for believing a woman can't disagree with another woman.
Right.
some petty
You're like scrolling back to her like quinceañera and being like, stop simping and stuff like that.
No, but this is like people are really in love with her, and I just think that's she's a Clintonian, like she's the face of a modern Clintonian, and no one realizes that this is how people treated Hillary in like 1990.
Yeah.
And what's so funny is representation is a massive cope. Like you hear people be like, it's like, first of all, you wouldn't want representation because adequate representation for especially people below the line of where blacks are in this country would be under 13% representation. Like you don't want representation. You don't want this kind of like weird proportionalism, which is constant call amongst the pole left, right?
Yeah. Well, it seems like there's so many things that if people's lives weren't endangered, if brutal poverty and brutality, if all that stuff wasn't going on, people wouldn't care about how many.
No, of course.
They wouldn't care about, quote unquote, seeing themselves on the screen. I mean, or they care less, it'd be like, less
absolutely.
Of a thing,
I think it's a massive issue, especially with like movies from the last 5 years that I think are going to be looked at in 10 to 15, like they were blaxploitation. I think it's really going to look super bad. But what's funny is, when you get into the idea of sortition, so I would be fine with a Congress that was 100% 90-year-old white men, if and only if they were white men from across the class and career spectrum. So if you can give me not Black and Latinx and trans business people and lawyers, but instead give me a bunch of old white men who have been carpenters, who have been school teachers, who have worked real fucking jobs, I'm cool. Like nothing that would stop me from being okay with that kind of representation, because that's real representation.
It's interesting to me. You get called a class reductionist for that, but it's like almost just like talking about just class at all. It makes you a class reductionist. It's like,
to be a class reductionist is to be not a race reductionist.
Right. I know.
The thing is, like the IDPOL people are basically pulling out the calipers at every turn. Like,
there's
really
race essentialism in a weird way.
Like lane politics is modern phrenology. Like you need people to be able to build coalitions by agreeing with you despite not having the same background.
Yeah. I mean,
and it's also to it gets into such a dark place where white people are telling Black conservatives that they're not really Black.
I know. I can't. I had an argument with a friend. This is the thing. It's like on one level, I'm all like, oh, I don't really know about politics. I shouldn't talk about. But then I'm appalled sometimes at just people who I love and are smart, and I respect them, and they're smart people who don't get like certain perspectives that seem really obvious to me. Like I was talking with this friend who runs like an arts, like a thing that funds, like it's a funded arts presentation thing for music. And he posted something that was just like, look at how few of these artists are working class. Like, he's like, we need to have like some working class, like there should be grants, like we should be doing more grants that are based on working or something. Like we need to do more to have more people who grew up working class and poor in like classical music, etc. And without being snarky, I said, well, I commented, I was like, well, there's less incentive for that for institutions because there's no optics on it. It's not as visual. It's not as visible what people's class background is, maybe by your accent or something. But like in general, it doesn't have the same college brochure like thing that you can show on a thing. And I was like, so there's less in it for institutions to do that cynically. And he was just like, what do you mean? And I was like, dude, am I speaking Greek here? I mean, it's like that just seems like the most obvious point. I mean, it doesn't mean that there's nothing to be done and I'm like super fucking based for bringing it up, but it's I was like, how do you not get that that's what's going on? Like optics and like super, I guess.
So, and this is where what I would like properly is, say you're operating off of some sort of incremental idea of like, it's still the US, it's still this. But, we don't have to dream so far as to say, oh, it could be arranged however we want it to be arranged. But say we're taking the idea of the Congress and grafting it onto, some better politics. You can just say, okay, well, people are sorted into Congress for a few years. There's no term. You don't have a career at this. You get
lottery.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like a jury. So the one of the funniest things, and to bring it back to noise and the community and all of that, the most heinous thing, and I talked about this on Contain, the most heinous thing I've ever interacted with as a person who grew up poor in the South, who, we theoretically care about things like we care about people not going to jail for a long time for no reason and shit like that, right? We theoretically care about these things. Is that every person I know in our weird noise community has bragged about being weird in order to get out of jury duty. You get punks, you get metal dudes, whatever. It's like I showed up with the fucking Napalm Death shirt and my piercings out, and they didn't want me for jury duty. Are you fucking kidding me? Like, I would take out my piercings, I would put makeup on my hands to conceal my tattoos. I would do anything and everything to be a juror.
Yeah, right. You've got only certain people. You've got only normies or whatever, or people who want to be jurors to be jurors.
The cool thing about a jury is it works how Congress should work, which is it should be a divine duty that you were handed down, that you are allowed to do. And no matter how bad you want to do it, you cannot do it until it's your time. Like, I want to be on a jury because I think that you could do good there. I think you can really profoundly affect something by being in that room in a real way. And this kind of like people pose about being like, you can do something locally. You really can't. But if you wanted to, that's a time where you're given power, and you're not given it because you wanted it or because you could afford to run or anything like that. You just got it, and it's important. And there's such a thing as jury nullification. I don't know if you saw TFW No GF, but
I did, but I forget how that.
One of the kids has a shirt that just says Google jury nullification, and I love it because the way jury nullification works, it was a really big deal during the weed, like the kind of like times in which like weed legalization consciousness was building during the 90s. But basically, like, the way it works is if 12 jurors are in a room and they say, hey, this guy was caught red-handed. He for sure did it. But that thing that he did that's illegal shouldn't be illegal. They can just go out and say, not guilty. And the judge, despite literally being able to say, hey, man, that guy had like a bong in his hands.
Yeah.
Nothing can stop the jury from doing that if 12 people can have that consensus.
If it's interesting. So yeah, so you could sort of
change the law.
So can you hang the jury then, even if you agree that they did it, but you can hang it by doing I think it should be nullified, and then everyone has to.
It's the idea that you could actually reach that consensus and just say, sorry, judge, we don't think he did it, even though he did.
Right.
It's such a beautiful kind of thing, and it's one of those things where, like, I believe consensus is the next horizon for people. It's like it seems almost impossible to agree on stuff. It's the only thing worth pursuing is good faith communication between each other, in which someone says something and you're like, oh, did you mean that? And then you're like, you follow them, and you're a real person. You can explain yourself.
Well, this is I do love your general vibe with this sort of like, it's very, very humanist. I know that's sort of like a touchy-feely word that people don't, especially we're supposed to be all tough and like Nick Land and like, ooh, like, humans, that's for pussies or something. But I like this vibe of where, you want to meet people in a human way where they're at, but also you're not on this vibe of like, well, I'll meet anyone halfway. I mean, you're a Nazi and I'm a communist. Let's meet halfway between. I mean, that's centrism. I also think is so weak too, and you're not on that vibe at all.
Compromise. It's about figuring out, like, compromise is such a dirty word because compromise is dragging the American socialist and the American political rightward. And it's because of McCarthyism. It's first of all, because it benefits the single party that are the Republicans and like Democrats, who are both kleptocrats who are pretending to argue with each other.
Right.
But I understand who it really benefits, but the right has always been so good at inviting their crazy cousin to the table and saying, hey, this is Jeb, he's a KKK member, but like makes me sound pretty reasonable, right? But like old school communists, even like American old school communists who like these spare tired Jews should have been like invited to the table.
Wait, what is I'm so with what you're saying. What is a spare tire Jew other than the name of my next record?
So like a spare tire Jew is just like this kind of like, not this like New York, oh, like you know, like it's not provincial or pleasant, just like a kind of guy who would like help you with your car, like
working class Jews, like,
you know,
not
like these ideas of like what like shit was during the beat and hippie era and stuff. Like those dudes were communists, and like through that time have become like insane conservatives. And it's because like there's no place in the political or the socius for them. You don't get to have these people with like libidinal value. You don't get to have these people who are able to be like, oh yeah, like it's cool. Like you have to, even Bernie at his most like that fails because he's a coward.
Libidinal value. This is, I am,
dude,
I am so, it needs to be unpacked, that word, but so on board. You're talking about the you said, but you said that they were cool. So you just like coolness being something that deals with desire and vitalism.
Right. And there's a need to bring back these kind of people who were like entirely shunned from being able to participate, and in their in their exile from participation, just like, you know, they had to play the game like anybody else. And then like, you know, by the time you're 50 and you own property and like you're not political, your politics are you don't want to pay taxes. And that's fine, because realistically, the people who are arguing to pay taxes are participating in paying for what? Like I would pay more taxes if I could choose where that went. But why are Democrats shaming you into paying taxes for the military that they supposedly don't like? Like right. I would be fine with what I would call like allocative taxes. So you pay a high marginal rate, but you decide where the percentages go. And if not enough people decided to fund your war, you don't have it.
This is exciting. I like this idea. Wait, but just to back up though, a couple sentences ago, because you actually did lose me on a little something. Just you were talking about how people in the 50s. Wait, you were talking about like spare tire Jews and more weirdo working class communists had libidinal value in the sense of that they're like. So you're saying that there's like a sense of joy and desire to their or orientate. Is that the vibe? It's like,
I mean, look at Zizek. Like, on every level, he's a spare tire Jew. Like, he would get out. Like, Zizek fucks. There's no.
Yeah, yeah.
Like,
you're talking about a left that fucks. You're talking about a left.
Exactly,
that fucks,
and that's exactly all I mean. Is just this kind of like, and it's not even this idea of like, obviously, like the idea of a spare tire Jew is like more like jocular anti-Semitism, which like you are my Semitic friend, and I'm married to a Jew, so I'm out.
Jews do not give a fuck at all. Like,
yeah, I know, but like this is the kind of thing of like even putting it in this racial background is part of like an adjacency to whiteness that makes you, you know, approachable, but also not quite white, and that is like even part of what I'm talking about, because you know the Jews that I think many people are thinking of are your landlords, whether or not you want them to be or not, or whether or not that's because of whatever your fucking like weird Fortean machinations are. That's what your optics are for that. And that's not always true. That's not always been true. Like that's not, it's just, you don't have optics for those kinds of people. You don't see those people. And a lot of those people assimilate. So you don't know that they're Jews. Like that's just what's up, you know? And so when I'm talking about like, just a kind of libidinal value, I mean that since Reagan, we've really been making this like, oh, I want to have a beer with that guy mistake. Like, you know, and a lot of people were having this like left populism, right populism. Trump and Bernie are the exact opposite of each other. And that's so dumb, because Trump is the logical reaction to Obama. Like he's an equal and opposite Obama. He absolutely appeals to the exact part of his right base that Obama appealed to on the left. And
you mean they have a beer thing, or
like I mean like you know what, like Clinton went on Arsenio,
and played saxophone,
and played saxophone, and what Obama's like doing layups on BuzzFeed videos, you know.
I remember that.
And it's like also the same thing of like, if you're looking at it now, why is Richard Spencer endorsing Bloomberg a few months ago and now endorsing Biden. It's because he was sold a bill of lies by Donald Trump. All of these like ethno-nationalists wanted Trump to be a real hardcore white nationalist.
He wasn't. He didn't have enough principles. Yeah,
he tricked them the same way that Obama tricked his base.
Yeah,
and you know, like it's the exact same move of, hey man, like he's when we talk about dog whistling, when we talk about how Trump dog whistles to these people, it's like, yeah, because he wants their votes. He doesn't want to do their shit. He has no backbone.
That's what it took me a little while to realize, because when he was first elected, I was on the biggest Holocaust hysteria for like 4 months. I was like, this is literally the Holocaust next month. And so I do have to admit, I was like, that was incorrect. Hysteria brought on by BuzzFeed. But so would they be libidinally? So like you saying, like Trump and Obama like appeal to the idea of like libidinal value
for their base, and that's the thing. Like no one's hot to everyone. This is like something you find with like women all the time. Of like, oh, like you know, fucking all. Some people are like, oh, like Ryan Reynolds is really attractive, and like you find women all the time who can look at like very hot movie stars and just be like, that guy's not for me. Right. It's like there's no one. It is for everyone, right? And so it's just being libidinal is more than just some vitality at a sexual level. It is an actual cool. It's a mystique. It's why I think even Bernie has it on some level.
A little bit, he does.
A little bit. It's weird, and I think that what I was really trying to say was less about a candidate and more about how the right has made themselves look very palatable by inviting their extremists to the table.
Yes.
And since the left, the American left, what is just liberalism, have been called pinkos at every turn for mild, just like not even real anything. Right. Because they've been called pinkos for no reason. They don't bring anyone with weirder ideas. Bernie Sanders was not a Democrat until 5-6 years ago. He was never been a Democrat. He's caucused with Democrats, but he has never been a Democrat. And it's because people like that, he was getting like shunned by those people. He was like, like you're going to make us look weird. You're going to make us look like, it's like what they should have been doing is like inviting weird dudes.
Yeah. You're saying the extreme factor gives it, I mean, the extremity of certain stuff gives it a cool factor.
Yeah, I mean, you have to bring these weird guys in who then like make you look reasonable. So because you're not compromising with anything. If you're compromising from your if you and your base and your principles are constantly compromising, you are consistently capitulating farther and farther.
Right. Well, yeah, it's sort of like the Overton window of ideas it opens to the right, and the left hasn't been pulling it open to the left as much.
Not at all. And this is why like I don't even worry. Like I would love it to be true that there were real socialist or communist options, and but like that's not what AOC is. That's not what she's providing to anyone. Because what is she backing most of all? InPol, which is just neoliberalism repackaged. Like it is.
Yeah, I mean, and this, I mean, it's just talking about libidinal stuff with left versus right. Like I remember a time, you know. I remember in my 20s, like staying with these people in Seattle on tour with Z's, and I remember they had like so many books, like just so much feminist literature, and these were men, and I remember having this sense of like, this looks fun, feminism looked liberatory for everyone. It didn't feel like this finger wagging like homework assignment. Like you said you were going to dismantle the patriarchy and you still haven't, and you got to do it. It felt like this thing that was actually like that fucks. Like it felt like
the church ladies, right? Like that's what we have.
Yeah, that's the thing. So it's like, this is like, I mean, not that I went away from that house being like, I'm a feminist now, but it seemed liberatory. It fucked. It had a libidinal value to it, or valence.
It's like, like what is that? Like part of that is it being, a niche thing where like you can even point to it, where like if you were a kid now, you would be like, oh, I go to everyone's house and everyone has these things, like they're all reading Judith Butler or pretending to,
Right.
And it's like, why, people who do that now, they're doing it to, fucking throw the smoke off of them, right? Like they're trying to, I mean, every dude who is talking like that is talking so they don't get got.
Get got. Yeah.
It's true. Like,
My friend Jeremiah always says "get got" as far as cancellations. He's like, "Oh,
yeah,
guys."
Slimerman.
Simon, yeah.
Yeah,
Jeremiah
I met
Zimmerman.
him in Park Slope when we ran into each other.
Oh, yeah. That's right. That's right.
Yeah, so pull me where you want me to go. What do you want me to talk about?
Oh well, we talked about we should get to let's still hold off on getting to the questions. They're not crazy, but there's some spicy illiberal cats poking their heads out here, which is always interesting. But let's just do plug style. Mute presence. What's the vibe on mute presence, Xylon?
Mute presence is me basically feeling like there's no music journalism worth reading, pretty much, period. The closest I get to caring about music journalism is the Quietists, who are a bunch of pussies, and I like really, it sucks so hard because you get this like British import of like American politics where everything is, you hear it now all the time with coronavirus, but even more so since 2016 because of Brexit and Trump. Just the constant tone is, in our trying times, like, it's just like, yo, fuck you. Like, you think that like Obama was good for the world, like that's when you thought things were great. Like, what is it
back to normal? Yeah.
Why do you talk like that? And to me, to be these British people who theoretically like care about the fall and Marky Smith, but are, just constantly kind of churning out, this music's cool because of the skin color and genitalia of the person playing it. It just sucks. And it's like one thing I feel very much like a huge kind of push to talk about all of the things that I like, not just one type of thing. I can talk about noise with my noise friends, but everyone I know who likes harsh noise is either, kind of self-consciously or otherwise like backing something outside of noise, right? And I am one of the only people I know that listens to a truly obnoxious amount of new music. I plan my whole day around listening to new records, so I break out all of my, I listen to a record while I write, and then I listen to a record while I draw, and all of my projects are built out into blocks like that.
Yeah.
And so I've been doing like dumbass, like hierarchical kind of lists and in spreadsheets for years of the things that I listen to yearly, and I'm averaging about 400 to 600 new full-length albums every year.
Oh my god! So you're really obsessive. This is cool, man. That's like OCD energy.
Yeah, it's definitely like a little odd. Yeah. So I listen to a lot of stuff, and I really like the kind of constant process of trying to rehear things throughout the year and what I spend the most time with and all that. I just don't think that enough cool things are being spoken about really anywhere. I get into this place of you get Pitchfork or something, and they're talking about a kind of noise thing, and the way they talk about it is so obnoxious. And I also kind of I really like the scene report aspect of knowing most of these people. And it's not just noise. Like, I've known, all these people who were doing Deconstructive Club like 5 years ago, all of like YS Blood's an ex-noise person.
Why's Natalie?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. She's awesome, man. Why's Blood is so good.
But people don't realize, like, I'm going down like titles, like new albums every week, and I'm like, oh, I know that person.
Yeah.
Not from like, they don't make noise anymore, but like Container like is a noise dude who makes like techno and plays at Berghain and like makes money, and that's cool. I just think it's funny because the large needle drop sort of like Reddit music fan base that exists on the internet now is constantly kind of getting into like more and more dissonant stuff, and like Death Grips 10 years ago was pushing people more and more in that direction.
Yeah, I loved them.
No, it's totally chill, and it's like it's this weird thing of people constantly like peacocking and trying to like totem pole each other about like what is really deep. And it's like I've been on the other end of I've heard some of the harshest music in existence, some of the most uncomfortable music in existence, and sometimes that's not what you want to listen to. And like harsher than harsh is not always like cool or good.
Right.
Or in like getting into like silly quiet music is cool. And I just want to play more with talking about records that are happening right now, talking about where those things actually come from, sort of like an ethnomusicography sort of way.
Yeah. That's it. So, and you kind of felt like you're doing mute presence. It sounds like almost like negative inspiration. Like you're most excited by how these other places are failing or something. Like,
Well, I mean,
like the quietist. It seems like you feel kind of betrayed by the quietist. Like it was doing what you want in the world, but then it kind of just got whack, and you got to like, you're like, I'm fixing that. Like,
it's absolutely true. It's like you go at the end of a quietist article and you see a link to purchase a Norman Records record. Like you buy it from a distributor. Like you can buy the record right at the bottom of the review. And if you go to Pitchfork, you can go to a link at the bottom that Pitchfork tells you, hey, we might get some of the proceeds from this.
Yes.
Like they're not even like, they can't legally hide it. That's totally fine. And I understand it costs a lot of money to run like any sort of journalistic media because this stuff isn't really like, no one's making a living off of it. I understand that. However, I have time. I listen to a lot of music anyway, and I'd rather have more integrity than that. Most music journalism I see reads like a glorified press release.
Oh, all the time. Now, you can just decide what people say about you. You know, you can't decide whether they cover you, but you can decide what they say. I mean, they will copy and paste. You know,
that's so dark. Like I don't think like I really like your music, and I'm really excited for the day that like something of yours comes out that I like jam as much as Extra Life stuff.
I know. People like Extra Life the best. It's cool.
But that's like,
but
there's integrity to that. And that's what I think is like really kind of missing, is being able to look at your friend and be like, hey, like I really jammed this thing you made 6 years ago, and I don't need you to make something for me because I'm not your only audience. Yeah. But like having that integrity to be like, this is my favorite thing, not, oh, you made a really cool thing and I love it.
Or like, like we're friends, so we're gonna like just we're just gonna blow sunshine at each other's ass, you know.
That's all of it forever. Is just people constantly being like, oh, like I wanna talk about your record because it's cool and you're my friend. And it's like, what is is anyone making money off of this? Is anyone happy?
Well, it also sounds like you're going to have, for mute presence, I mean, you're going to have your background in theory and foreground in theory really brought to bear on that, right? I mean, you're going to be like, because I know, like, I mean, there have been like some really great quietist write-ups, like in the past, I can't remember who, but I mean, I've seen pieces where I'm like, oh, okay, this is like really bringing up, you know, not in like an impenetrably thorny way, but like bring up like, oh, okay, they're like talking about maybe.
Oh, I can't hear you.
Yes, you can hear me now, right? Gotcha. Yeah. It gets, somehow this mic just gets a little squishy sometimes. But yeah, you're gonna have some theory. Well,
that's also
background in there, right?
Well, that's why I think that the kind of issue with like why I'm most upset about the quietist is like any news site can cover whatever the hell they want, but you know, and I'm not gonna like every record that gets covered by a site, whatever, right? But to try to ground it in something smarter than I'm just talking about what the sounds on this record are. And then the smart thing that you're grounding it in is the most like milquetoast liberal kind of like byline. It's like, whatever, dude. Like I want to talk about things and how they relate to each other. And no one's like, you have to have a will to risk, right? Like you have to be able to be like, oh, like this music like reminds me of shit that the like authors like, that's not what it's about. Like I don't care. It's like, fuck you. Like it's not yours anymore.
It's not up to exactly. I totally feel that. And you're gonna, well, speaking of the quietest, you're gonna be, I mean, mute presence is gonna be in collaboration with Adam Lehrer, right? Who I don't know personally, but I sort of I read his name is like fired from the quietist or whatever. I read some stuff of his that was really cool. What's you guys like co-editors on that, or is he like a contributor?
I'm editing it, and then Adam's gonna do some pieces for it. Hopefully a column, I think. You have a piece that is going to be debuting on there.
Yeah.
I have some other friends who are doing some things. We're doing retrospective on all of the 90s material made by Facial Mess, like classic Japanese British expat who has lived in Japan since the 90s, who makes amazing like cut up harsh noise. I really want to foreground like kind of like more intelligent conversations around noise, while also just like feeling free to talk about the pop music I'm into or whatever else. Like some of my favorite records from the last few years are like the Matana Roberts stuff, and I want to just be able to like talk about the records that I'm into.
I mean, that's a great way to start. I mean, just like not, I really having the faith that just what you're into makes sense.
Yeah.
As a starting point, that you don't have to actually shape it. I mean, that's kind of with this channel. I'm sort of like, I don't know if this makes sense as a brand yet, but if I just do exactly what I want to do and a lot of it, it will amount to something that is actually legible.
Yeah,
you know?
Totally.
Yeah.
Do you have more like plug related questions?
Oh, plug. I don't know. I mean, mute presence. Well, that's online, or because we haven't talked that much about the details. It's not a print thing, is it? Or
no, I'd like to eventually expand into print, but I'm gonna do an online thing because that's what I can. I think that it can afford to sustain itself at that level.
It makes more sense. I mean,
yeah. But I'm just gonna try and run that for a while. I have some kind of like design oriented ideas and maybe philosophical underpinnings for why I'm going to present some things the way I am. Like I'm going to do top 100 lists of things, but they will be randomly generated, their order as you can read them. So you're going to have like a cached auto generated, like, hey, none of these records, you're not allowed to know what the fuck number 1 is versus number 57. Like that's not, I believe in sets. I think it's important to have a set to prioritize, but I also refuse this idea of like hierarchically just being like, oh, like this record's better than that. So you can
the countdown.
No,
the
it's
countdown.
not. Like fuck that. I just don't care. And trying to like interact and experiment with different ways of, I think that it's important. The reason that we like ratings, the reason we like sets is because they help us prioritize things. There's only a finite amount of time, there's only so many records you can get to, whatever. And it's useful to have someone tell you, oh, if you like this, you might like that. And it's not going to be as simple as that, but also it's very useful to try to give someone, hey, if you don't really know what's happening, this is a place where you can find some of that out. I'd like to give, not on a music review basis, but also just more musicians an outlet to talk about things in a way that's more interesting than like, I mean, the impulse for you to write is something that I think should be nurtured and cultivated. And the thing that I hate the most about many musicians who have that impulse is they don't stick with it. And instead they say, oh, I'm just going to like pack this in the liner notes.
Yeah. Well, I am going to be writing more, not just, just this thing that's going to be in mute presence, but just, I'd like to write actually some about music, but actually this YouTube channel is kind of a way for me to be like, you know what, I don't have the time to actually make this thing into like a full-on essay, so I'm just going to do a slightly more disorganized, like brain dump.
Music racist.
I mean, it's like that. I could have written a whole thing, but I'm like, you know what? This just came out. People are going to forget about it in a week. I care. I definitely care. I do not care enough to write a rigorously thought out piece, but X, Y, and Z needs to be said. But yeah, I mean, that piece that I wrote, I don't want to give too much of it away, but it's like.
Your mic again. Sorry.
But yeah, I don't know. I worked on that for months just to make sure that I am saying it in a way that I can stand by. And if people get mad, I can be like, it's okay that you're mad. I said it the way I want to say it. But I don't know.
Important. No, I think that's really, really important, is to formalize these things so you can stand behind them, because I think that many people, I think it's part of the appeal of Twitter or whatever else, is that if you even take on the aesthetics of something that is ill thought out or quick, you can always just kind of like defer.
Yeah, delete it or be like, oops, like I was just drunk tweeting, or, whatever.
And that's, once again, what I love about following a theorist across his lifetime is saying, wow, you spent a lot of time thinking like this, and then 20 years later spend a lot of time saying you were fucking wrong. And that's great. Like, that's really good. Like, that's beautiful that you can interact with that much rigor towards your own failings. And that's all that I ask of anyone. It's not much, but it's a lot.
It's very rare that I hear people be like, you know what, I was wrong. It's always either like digging your heels in and standing by some shit, or like apologizing, like, I was problematic, I said XYZ, instead of just being like, there were reasons why I said XYZ. Now I think it's bad. But
right, and I think that's, I mean, as a child of a person with bipolar disorder, I, for a long time, was extremely pissed off by any sort of hypocrisy. I was extremely like freaked out by hypocrisy and sort of like a lack of self-consistency. And as I get older, I realize that contradicting yourself is literally growth.
Yeah.
It's just, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's literally what being a person is, you know. It's like in fact, like complete consistency is like, I don't know, just to get Deleuze about it, or maybe Chris Stava about it. It's sort of thing is killing me. It's a weird version of just what subjectivity is. It's an outmoded idea of like, you just are a person, you have positions, you just are this one thing. And
like like Genesis talked about this a lot, like behavioral cut up. Like, there's no reason to limit the amount of people you can be, and I think that's good. Like, I think that it's also a huge part of just, I think it, you know, not to get quasi-religious, but, you know, a lot of the kind of things we didn't talk about have to do with my belief in like redemption and the ability for people to rehabilitate. And I just, you know, part of that's just growing up, but also I really shudder to think what we do with people by saying, oh, you're 32, cool, you're not going to live another 50 years. Like, you have a lot of time to like really figure it out and hopefully like live within consistency of whatever your experience has brought you to believe is the best way to interact with people.
That's
what you have to like trust and kind of cultivate in others is, oh, I want to walk with you here and like get you to a place where you treat people better, because that's all we can do. It's like the good faith thing.
Yeah, it's interesting you said. I mean, I'm glad that we're not going off on some whole thing about quote unquote like cancel culture and whatnot. But I like that you brought up though this thing about like that not giving people a chance for any kind of redemption, or just being like, oh, you're 32, like that there's that to an extent comes from this like apocalyptic, oh, we're not even going to live another 50 years, so really? why should we even really think about where you're going to go in 10, 20 years, because we're just done with we're just like liquidating people, just like,
you're also liquidating people tends to put them around people who are even more vulnerable and have less of a vocabulary for you than you. So if you're even being consistent within your own worldview as like a call out oriented person or whatever, theoretically you might want to keep an eye on that person instead of just saying, oh, you're dead to us, but find someone else. That's really
no, totally.
But so do you want to hit me with these questions?
Yeah, I mean, actually, see, now that they're like, maybe we should have gotten to them in real time, because they're all kind of off the, they're all like previous topics. Marcus Kane asked me, but it should go to you. Like, have I read Psycho-Cybernetics? Do you know this?
No,
text?
I do not.
I don't know either. I haven't read. Let's see what else. Well, actually, you know what? I mean, we don't have to go totally recap on politics, but John Lamberton, really cool guy, by the way. He asks, curious if Xylon relates to the term anarcho-syndicalism at all. What is that? I never knew what that was.
So syndicalists, there's a few different flavors. There's Delionism and workerism, which I find myself a little bit more kind of down with. But the way syndicalism would classically work in an anarcho instance or otherwise is that you have syndicates, which are kind of like large guilds, like say a large union. And in an anarcho-syndicalist context, say, the people who make all the bread and the people who make all the coal, do all the coal mining, they need shit from each other. And so they're bargaining with each other as a syndicate who interacts with like one part of the production. And so the way everybody gets their shit is as these kind of like mass syndicates up their production in order to get everybody the stuff through cooperation. I'm not a fan, mostly kind of for two reasons. I believe in a state that arbitrates, but also just for efficiency reasons. It's the same reason patchwork really squicks me out, or like
I was gonna say it sounds totally mold bugged out, or like a left,
yeah,
like a left version of patchwork,
or like even just states' rights freak me out, because I always say that states' rights are a bad precedent. Like if you are excited for one state to do something that you think is good, then you are also emboldening the ability for another state to do something that you think is bad. This is like my constant argument against how like weed has been legalized in this country, is that it's actually like giving the blueprint to a lot of the pro-life people, of just like, hey, we're going to break the federal law until the courts come down on us. And that's dark, especially when what you're operating within is the idea that the people who can afford to will just move where things are going their way politically. And the people who are, oh, I can't hear you.
That.
There we go.
You can hear me. It's like shitty quality, but you can hear me.
Yeah.
All right, we'll stick with this for a little while. But cool. Yeah, no, I always think about like with that super states' rights thing, like verging on the patchwork thing. You know, it's like okay, like it's funny because I bring that up to like pretty normie people being like, what would you people being like, oh, these like trumped out like flyover states or whatever, they're such rednecks, like fuck them. And I'm like, okay, well, what if they secede? And like, yeah, let's do that. And I'm like, so then you're gonna have slavery going on 100 miles away. Like, are you down with that? I mean, not that those states necessarily would want to have slavery, but theoretically, you'd be like, you'd have to tolerate.
No, of course
that.
Well, this is it's not just it's not about tolerance. It's I don't even believe in how we do it on a global level most of the time. I just think that it's like really dark and managerial and scary, and people who can afford to move. People who can't are the ones getting terrorized, and that's what's so scary. Also, I'm just generally like an anti-weed person. I'm like a full legalize all drugs or none at all.
Interesting. You sold me weed when I was in. Didn't you and Ezra hook me up when we were in?
I've never sold weed.
Okay. No, actually, this is illegal. So no, you did not sell me weed. But
no, I've never. But yeah, that might have happened in my house.
Yeah. What am I?
But I've never. My dad's from Jamaica, so like I've been around a lot of that rhetoric my whole life, and I don't really. It's so corny to me. I'm like a Sykes person or nothing, but like for legal reasons, it's just like I believe that you should do something kind of like what Portugal is doing or not at all. Like you can't, because what legalizing weed does is it codifies the idea that there's good drugs and bad drugs.
Yes. No, I feel this.
And that's extremely scary. My mom's first boyfriend when I was a child that I remember was a crack addict, and I like went and we took him to rehab, and I would like visit him in rehab over 6 months. And then when he got out, he needed to be so sober that he couldn't be around my mom because she still drank and smoked cigarettes. And it's like, it's just dark. Like when you're poor, you're like around that shit really early. And to me, it's like, that's the problem. Like the idea that white people were arguing for the legalization of a drug it was already like they were already safely doing in their own living room in the 90s is like so fucking bleak. But yeah, I don't like syndicalism, and I don't like most anarcho shit because it's gonna leave disabled people like drooling in the street, like pissing themselves, like dying. And the reason I don't like syndicalism, even though it is, I would argue, probably the best version of something like an anarcho-communism that I would like. The issue with it for me is that and we could have gotten into this a little bit during the sortition conversation, because I would argue that sortition should be expanded beyond just the government or juries into things like work, because I really think that people shouldn't be over-identifying with their career and their job. I think it's a huge issue within capitalism that people are basically, what freedoms are we giving up by not choosing your job? Well, you're giving up the freedom to allow 10% of the population to actually choose what they do for a living. So you can hope you might choose what you do for a living. So you end up not choosing what you do for a living. Like, no one's actually choosing their career.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
So like, you look at it as it's a massive cope within the arts, where like people go to art school to get an art related job that's not actually has anything to do with their art career. And then it's like, oh, like, I'll make my art in the freedom.
Right. At least I'm around it, but it's like you don't care. It's like, it's not really actually.
It's like being a music tech or anything else. It's just like so soulless. And it's, if you're going to make real money, it's going to be extra soulless. And then you're going to go home and still wish you had time. What you should have done is become an electrician or a plumber and have enough money to do your shitty watercolors in the basement. Also, if we operated under the idea that art wasn't like some sort of thing you can do as a career, which it shouldn't be, you would have more people being honest with themselves and making art that's bad. Like, I wish that more people would make art that was personally fulfilling and just bad, instead of the constant anxiety of like, how do I make something that's like cool and like interesting? And you have all these like fucking losers in paint departments trying to like make things that relate to Deleuze, even though they've never read Deleuze. And it's just like spindly webs, and it looks like a crime map,
Right. It's like, I guess that's the rhizome. I don't know.
It looks like a rhizome, and it's like, that is actually like apocalyptic to people try to like co-opt like theory ideas to like legitimize art they don't even want to make.
Yeah.
So I just think people over-identifying with production, over-identifying with their jobs in general is bad. And I'd kind of like a situation where people cycle in and out of a job every few years and are consistently being trained from like 20 years on, alongside people who say you liked a job that you did for 3 years. You kind of like tick a box that says, hey, I'd like to get cycled back into this.
Yeah, it's like applying to do, like this is interesting, man. This is stuff I never really would have thought of.
I'm actually writing some highly prescriptive stuff, which is the opposite of what I normally do in any like theory realm, but I'm writing a sort of like dumbass manifesto, taking off from largely from what Fisher was doing with acid communism.
Have you read any of that? Because I never. It's like partially published, right? It's like,
yes, I have. I'm I'm not really into a lot of the people that are stewarding Fisher's legacy. Like, I don't like that Egress guy, like Xenogothic or whatever.
You don't like Zeno? Zeno, I don't know. What's wrong with him except that he didn't follow me back on Twitter? Other than that, I got no problem.
Well, I was very much on the side of the Adam Lehrer side of that beef when that war was happening. I also just think that it's like, fucking obnoxious to write a memoir about Mark Fisher like it was Kurt Cobain. It's like, why in any way sort of like play off of – he's very big into the idea that Fisher kind of like got over his – issues with cancel culture or whatever, and that you're a mark for complaining about it. And it's like, well, Vampire Castle is more potent than anything else he wrote in that decade.
I get, well, it's not my favorite thing that he wrote though, but I guess you could say it's the most culturally relevant.
It's relevant
or something. No, it remains relevant. I don't know. I
actually wish it had been bigger. Like, I wish Vampire Castle had been taken to its logical conclusions. Because it was a little topical at the time, which I think people forget. The thing that I've been most interested in revisiting is his write-up on Passion of the Christ, the movie. Rules. And if you go back into the K-Punk archives, you can watch Nick and Reza comment in like 2004.
I gotta check this out.
It's so insane because they all used to just be friends.
Right. And Land wasn't even like NRX at that point, or maybe he's brewing.
Fisher wrote a write-up for Dazed or Dis or something, one of those like corny things, for land, like as a kind of like primer for Nick Land in like 2011.
That's late. That's Xenosystems. It's getting into Xenosystems.
Yeah, I was like, this is kind of sick for doing this. That's so funny.
Dude, Xenosystems is such a creep show, man. But like, there's some shit in there. This okay. Speaking of problematic stuff that like, I kind of want to just because these comments, this guy Jake asks. I'm not answering this. I'm interested in is multiculturalism a net positive if places like Japan and pre-migrant crisis Netherlands seem to be the best countries by every metric? I'd like to hear both of your responses. So like, why is multiculturalism good since apparently Japan is like the best countries by every metric?
Do you want to start?
My only thing is that best countries is not clearly objectively true. My only feeling about immigration stuff is just that I don't have the same instincts about it for America that I do for other places. Like I think America should let 1 million people in because that's what we're about. I don't see why Japan has to do that. That's my only. Like I'd have to do homework on every single nation to have an opinion on what they should do immigration wise. So that's my only.
I mean, I stand pretty firmly as Bernie said. Open borders is a Koch brothers proposal, and I believe that's true. I think that we are constantly like I'm a pro Brexit person. I am not against. I don't support why many people support Brexit. But I believe that the EU is a monster. I believe that globalization is a monster. And I believe that there are real reasons for working British people to not want to be a part of that. I think that's why someone like Jeremy Corbyn, who is an adult, who's been a socialist for a long time, knew, hey, maybe we don't like why this vote went this way, but maybe there's some good we could do with this situation we're now in. I'm not willing to just say, no, we'll remain. Because that's not true. It's not that's the best option for England. When you get into the issue of multiculturalism, I would tend to agree with you that America does not have some sort of like indigenous makeup as like this country of the U.S. that needs to be maintained, right? Of course not. But also, I mean, like I'm not one of these like Garvey, like Black people would not be welcomed going back to Africa. This is America as African Americans' home. It is as much African Americans' home as ours or whatever else. I do think that it becomes more of that like controlled opposition between, are you pro-life? Okay, so like what about after birth? Are you pro-life? I'm all for immigration if we could maintain even a decent living for the people who live here, which we can't. And so for me, it's like, it's perfectly fine to say, yeah, I think most immigration is bad for all parties. It's pretty terrible for most people. And if you hate America so much, like, why do you, like, if you think America is such a scary place, like, why would you even want people to come here? Like, why do liberals who are like scared of like if they were having their like Holocaust hysteria 4 years ago, why would they want people to be able to come here so like Trump's government could like round them up? It's like it makes you look at the visas that people come over here on the Philippines, it's slavery. You look at
I've read about that,
the kind of debtors economy that many people who are coming over on work visas are working off of, and it is deeply oppressive. So to me, this idea that it's liberatory is far more indulgent and decadent. It's far more like scary to be like, oh, I don't think that multiculturalism is bad. I don't think that Japan's a very good place. Like I don't like the ideas of like, oh, it's great. It's like, to me that shit is scary. Like it is a weird it's a very weird place. Since World War II, what has happened? And I would not argue that these metrics mean that it's the best place,
Yeah.
I think it's hard though. I think that like the kind of classic racist, like ethno-nationalist argument is that like, white people have their nations and black people have their nations. And it's like, Farrakhan and Fred, like Fred Phelps or whatever can all agree, or like
I know, that's separatist,
because they're all separatists. To me, I think it's more complicated than that. I would love for America to be a place where everyone could be given a proper living. I also think that a lot of coalition building that should be being done isn't being done. So like, it would be over for everyone if Latino people in this country and Native American people got together and were like, hey, like probably even genetically, we're pretty similar. What if we're the same? And like actually bargained as a block? Because they don't. Like it's one of the scariest things in this country. Like you want to talk about who's actually being very racially oppressed. It is a almost entirely obliterated, entirely genocided population of people who live on reservations.
Yeah.
And I mean the police violence statistics are worse for natives.
Is that right? Yeah. Not shocked. I'm not shocked.
No,
it just like, doesn't get talked about,
No, and exactly. And it's like the things that get so scary with liberals is like this idea of like proportionalism. Like we would like it to be a proportionate amount of police killings. We would like
Yeah. Right.
Are you fucking kidding me? Like, and
right.
You see the callousness and like, oh, like, who cares if white people are getting shot by cops? It's like, I legitimately very much care. Like,
yeah.
As a Southerner, you listen to Copperhead Road by C. Burrell. It's about 3 generations of men breaking the law around the same holler. Old school rednecks are anti-cop.
Yeah. Well, this is, I mean, it's poor people get killed by police. I mean, that is the common thing. I mean, it's...
And the entirety of the black population is unnecessarily and unrealistically, highly proportionately poor, which a rising tide raises all boats.
Yeah.
You can fix that more easily by making everyone less poor than you could do it with any sort of like, I mean, I shudder to think of other kinds of like proportionate plans that just like, oh, it makes my heart sink.
Yeah.
It would be bad for everyone. It would be really terrible.
Yeah.
Let's get more of these comments.
Yeah, we got Invisible War. I wonder, that might be Raul Anthony, I'm not sure. But Invisible War asks, thoughts on the technocratic power grab, parentheses, squeeze, via COVID?
Oh, I mean, that's extremely scary. I mean, these are the people that I am most freaked out about. The people think that they're going to get like lined up and shot by like brown shirts. They're going to get lined up and barcoded by fucking like UC Irvine graduates. This is the reality, is that you have these Irvine and Silicon Valley people. Like people don't even know that Silicon Valley is like an outdated term for like your overlords. Like that's not who it is anymore.
It's not. I don't even. UC Irvine is a good music program, I think.
Yeah, exactly. But like that's like Irvine is also the same sort of place. It's like the same sort of like, and you follow this bot like sort of like invention of cybernetics, like OSS bullshit of like cybernetics was created as like a system of social control, and all of the techies like legitimately see you as like numbers and nodes. This is what, like, I mean, even Deleuze at the end of his life, when he talks about postscriptive on the society of control, it is him basically saying like, hey, maybe some shit can get too rhizomatic because, and it's you, like you are the people who are just getting like fucking passed through. And it is, I mean, it's true. Like people are, it's really, really weird how, to come back to Nagel, like one of the things that she wrote kind of recently is about how the Celtic Tiger economy in Ireland was, this kind of beautiful thing for the 90s. It made Ireland better by just like welcoming, they had so little regulation that all of these like Silicon Valley headquarters for all of Europe came to Ireland.
I didn't even know that. Yeah.
So they call it the Celtic Tiger economy. And it basically like sent a huge surge and like kept Ireland afloat. And this is really funny because her whole thing is like, look, you're a country that's almost entirely white and your politics are being ran from people in California who are like exporting you the idea of like racial issues from America.
I know, like a lot of this exporting. That's the thing. It's like there's like Black Lives Matter marches in these other countries. I'm like, if it's bad, if racism's bad, good. I mean, you should like protest it. But I'm like, is that the same issue over there? I don't know.
1/4 of this planet is Chinese and Indian, and they do not ever think about us. Like, it is like, if you want to talk about like the other, it is that 1/4 of this planet never cast an idea about like any of us at all.
Yeah.
No, like it's like we're a total minority to them.
No, this is delusional shit.
It's absolutely, and it's like, but it's exporting even an idea of racialism that was not true. Like Jews are not white because European ethnic like racialism was not based on colorism. So like it was based on all of these like differences between other European people.
Yeah.
So it was like the phenotypes that were being pulled were not the same. When you look at like these weird ethno-nationalists and these weird like white nationalists here, have you heard of the idea of like castizo futurism?
What futurism?
Castizo futurism?
No.
Okay, so the whole idea is it's these like Evolite kind of like ethno-nationalists who are obsessed with the idea that, you know, like whites are dwindling, there's going to be a higher rate of POC to whites in the country.
Right.
And so in America, you have like the 1-drop rule. You know, Obama's black. He's not half white. He's half black. Like he's black. Yep. And that's how all American like race, like colorism works, is like you're if you're not white, you're a person of color. When in South America and Central America, it works the other way. You can whiten bloodlines. So like your kid is more white than you, therefore they're whiter, and you can whiten until.
Yeah. That's why
you have in Brazil and stuff, and it's because you had, you know, objectively darker than most Southern Europeans intermixing with indigenous people, intermixing with Afro-Caribbean people, and it's like, well, you know, you're going to have more like of a like spectrum. And their whole thing, these white nationalists, is, oh man, like, what if we could do that for white?
Yeah, no, I've noticed. I mean, I've noticed a little bit that some of those people say, they're like into Latinos that are just more mestizo. I mean, they're just kind of like, oh, cool. Like, I mean, Mexicans are cool. No, just become more. I mean, you know.
It's funny because Evola.
but I just say to Richard Spencer, okay, so you fuck one, dude. If you're so. No, actually, that's gross. Sorry. It's like rape. No, but anyway, yeah. No, well, because he would want to do that on a rape level. So okay, no good.
Evola is kind of like mixed on these things. So like you can look in the scripture of Evola and see him be like, hey, no intermixing, don't do that.
Yeah.
And you can also see him say, look, sometimes our blood needs to be put in spiritual conflict with the lesser bloods of others. And
it's just such like just sci-fi shit. Like,
no, that's like, I mean, you look at Jung, you look at it like fucking like what, like when you look at Evola, what's his name, fucking Mircea Eliade, the Romanian comparative. He's like basically just like Joseph Campbell, but more base. He's a comparative religion dude. Mm-hmm. There are all these kind of like right wing dudes, and it's because you realize that actually archetypes and like mythological archetypes are the value that backs up the dollar of race science. So it's like the gold standard of race science, because like you think you get into these archetypal things, and it's why things like Nietzsche and Freud can skew so close to the right or appeal so much to the right, even if they aren't objectively only able to be interpreted in that way.
I can see how Jung skews to the right, just race stuff aside, just because of anything that has to do with eternal essences.
Yeah. No,
I mean, that is inherently right wing.
It's essentialist.
It's essentialist. Freud seems a little different, because at least there's this human intervention where you're trying to like intervene. But as far as like Jung, I mean, I know. I know that. I mean, that Evola stuff. It seems like the people that are more into that now are people that are into like. They're just like, well, look, genes are real, genetics is real. Therefore, all that stuff you said about Evola and the conflict of the blood is like somehow that's the next logical like argument, which is just like demented.
Well, it's like funny because I think what Evola, like what they're interpreting Evola is saying, and what Evola is pretty much saying is like, hey man, like we should let this happen and then see if our superior stuff comes out on top.
Right.
And that's like the same thing idea as this Castizo stuff. And also just like the relationship of like Southern and South and Central America to all of this. Like you have the like esoteric Hitlerist dude, Miguel Serrano, who's just like making insane, like crazy art about Hitler and like the magic aspects of Hitler. And it's bonkers what exists. Like
Serrano is the guy.
Yeah, Serrano. Yeah, it's esoteric Hitlerism. There's so much insane shit.
Let me check that out.
Why it's truly funny because the left needs just like more crackpots.
Well, the left needs magic for sure, because I'm interested in what I'm very interested in the occult aspects of Nazism and fascism and just far right occultism in general. We got some questions here. Well, John Lamberton asks. Okay, I'm going to name a couple of these questions, and then probably you could fold them together. John Lamberton asks, not to be overly ASCII, but I'm interested to hear if the Temple of Psychic Youth and related clusters of chaos magic mean anything to Xylon. I'm sure they do. Clusters of chaos magic, TOPY. Marcus asks, what are your thoughts on Evola's magical writings? You kind of just talked about that a little bit. And then Jared says, do you remember which book that Evola makes the conflict of the blood comment in?
No, because I'm only enough of a like loser to like read about what the right thinks. I haven't read anything other than Ride the Tiger. But I'm like a weird, I love knowing what the right is working through, but I can't get on their message boards.
I've read a damning amount of Evola.
Yeah,
it's just like, but I mean, it's a lot of it's just blowhard garbage. But it's probably synthesis of the doctrine of race. Probably is where he says.
Yeah.
But
so the thing that's really funny to me about, so I normally don't talk about magic in public. I think it's like one of the things that like you know it's your relationship is so personal.
Yeah, it's a cult. It's literally occulted.
Yes, exactly, literally a cult. And so, yeah, but the thing that really changed my life is, you remember the DisInfoCon? Like,
no, what was that?
I was like, DisInfo was this kind of like network of people that it was like conventions and writing that was sort of conspiratorial, stuff like that. There's one from 1999 with the comic book writer Grant Morrison, and that guy like writes the Brave New World show now and stuff. Very wild dude. He's from Glasgow. But when I was 11 or 12 years old, I saw a lecture he gave on chaos magic. My mom had always kind of talked about Crowley when I was a kid and stuff, in this like weird way of like, you know, like interchangeable once again with like totally like normal shit like Harry Potter. My mom would like talk about Aleister Crowley. And so I was always like obsessed with the magic and like Crowley as a kid. But chaos magic really appealed to me because this kind of push away from tradition. Like Thelema is like old hat. Like you don't need to do things the way people used to. You can like, magic is like you and a Zippo lighter. Magic is you and whatever it needs to be.
Well, so memes too. I mean, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. And so I got really into sigils as a kid. Still, my relationship to tattoos in and of themselves is very related to like, I don't get shading. I don't get like, it's all about just like a very simple kind of symbol. So like here I have the Lady of the Lake from the Death of King Arthur. And then I have this like a cross here. Hammer and sickle, and then this is from Jodorowsky's Santa Sangra. And so like I still feel like an intense sort of relationship to symbols and symbology, and that was actually a huge part of my like relationship of getting into theory. I was getting very into linguistics and semiotics. I wanted to go to Brown for modern culture and media when I was in high school. Like that's what I wanted to do. And yeah, so my relationship to magic is I think I wouldn't be married right now if it wasn't for showing a person when I was 16 sigils, like legitimately.
Wow, you've been with Ezra since you were 16?
We met when we were 16 years old, and then we've been married. We've been dating since we were 19.
Oh man, that's so wholesome. That warms my heart.
No, that's the thing is like being like a queer and being like polyamorous, but also like being married and like I'm about to buy property. You know, like it's both things. You know, it's you don't.
I love it. That's American dream. Grew up poor. You sigil bootstraps. You know.
Yeah. Exactly.
What up? Let me see. Jared and Marcus are recommending all the Savola. Yes, I've checked out Introduction to Magic and the Hermetic Tradition, not cover to cover, but I yeah. They're Ride the Tiger is good.
Audience comes through.
What's that?
Good thing that your audience comes through.
Yeah. I mean,
here's all of it.
I know. I mean, there are many people who are not into Evola who are watching this and silently kibitzing. I was gonna. But this brings me to By the way, I don't have to be anywhere, so I'm fine with just. I mean, this is 2.5 hours. This is the longest one we've ever done. Do you have to be anywhere? Because I'm just like riffing.
Go for a minute. We can like maybe cap it at like 3.
Yeah, that sounds good. We don't even need to go that long. But I did one more topic is we didn't really talk about you and memes because I know that you're like a meme lord now. Or maybe not lord, but you're definitely nobility, or of some like because you wait, is it secret which meme page you run, or is it? Should we not talk about memes?
I mean, I've run some meme accounts. I've run 2 before.
Okay, but we shouldn't say what they are. Is that part of the occultism?
I'd prefer not to.
Okay.
The thing is it's the other half of like not total anonymity, but it is this like it's funny that my name is attached to this even. Like I don't normally and this is part of my commitment to I'm going to be running a podcast soon with a friend of mine who lives in the Bay, who lives in Oakland, and I really like committing to these formats in which if you're going to be hysterical, you're going to be weird or whatever, you have to really commit. Like, okay, you want to like catch me in some shit, you want to think I'm problematic or whatever, cool, watch the thing for 3 hours, that's fine. Like if you want to do that legwork, sure. But I'm not trying to like, if you really want to earnestly commit to like catching me in some shit, do it. But I don't like making it easy for people to just be like, oh, did you know? Like, fuck that. And I really believe in just kind of putting my face and my name and my words and saying, well, this is, listen to how I'm talking. Do I seem hurtful or hateful? Do you seem to ascertain this idea that I'm like, demonic or evil? Like I really want to play around with the idea that it's important to just take people at how they carry themselves.
This is why I like these live streams a lot, and I like doing these videos because I mean the way you speak and the way you put things across is the intention and where it's coming from and where it's going is more nuanced and often more positive than a tweet.
No, of course. And so I ran a meme page for about a year called Call Out the Gathering.
I saw that. I didn't know that was you. That was really funny.
Thank you. So I ran that for a while after like a pretty long mental preoccupation with the sort of like hypocrisies of call out culture and cancellation, because I was around for, I got a Tumblr in 2009. Like I'm not, it's been a while that these things have been brewing culturally.
Yeah. You're that generation for sure. Yeah.
Right. And but also like it's for some people, like any of this language like was introduced to them with Me Too. And I had already been watching it like ravage punk communities, which like, no harm, no foul. I don't care about punk, but like it sucks. Like it sucks. It's something I've been watching for a long time. And then I, continued to interact with it. And then I really, over the last year, like back to this idea of theory being a muscle, I didn't interact with theory for a long time. I had been kind of reading but I didn't have anyone to talk to about it. And therefore I feel like some of the language, even like my enunciation, how legible I was and how I interacted with it was really obliterated over a few years. And so about a year ago, I started kind of reading and finding people, seeking people out I could talk to about stuff. And so I, reread ATP, which like I read up 1,000 Plateaus for the first time when I was 16. And I have a lot more under my belt than I did at that time. So it's like I enjoyed it a lot artistically at the time, but didn't have a lot frame of reference.
Yeah. I
and
started reading. That was Z's was like in Z's. That was like the book club. That was almost like the required reading. But we could only barely just touch the contours of really what it was about. But then you just keep returning to it year after year, having read more, and you really see all the nodes, you know.
Yeah, and so I started running this other meme page called Smoother Striated Lanes.
Okay, there you go. So it's not secret. Yeah. That's the one I'm thinking of, because I'm psyched because it's a straight up theory meme page. I mean, it's just it's straight up theory. I love it.
There's a lot of us now. It's a very weird thing. Like my friend, I had some friends who were doing it that I had kind of met through seeing their memes and being into it. Found out they were a fan of my old meme page. And so I slowly started to say, hey, well, you know, whatever. I've been writing and drawing and designing and doing been doing like weird books that are kind of like theory related, like theory fiction stuff. I made one about Dungeons and Dragons.
I was a big D&D guy, like in middle school for sure.
Yeah, I refuse to play the game, but I read about it a lot, and I wrote a book about it.
It's super technical. I mean, just the situation of just like rolling special dice for like scaling different forms of ice on a, you know, any case.
Yeah, no, it's wild. So I'd been making some of this stuff, and I was sending it to friends, and they were like, hey, like, this is cool, this is good. And I started making the memes. And I made some of these memes really just starting around February, March, right before COVID popped off. Before I was just getting ready to move, really, because I moved this summer. And yeah, the memes are something that I care a lot about. I'm going to be unveiling a new page that does not post that often, kind of soon, which that piece of mine you read is going to be disseminated in a meme format.
Oh, I love this. I love it. Yeah, because we were talking about this a little bit, just chatting in Instagram or whatever. Just, I mean, like, just the extent to which memes are these little concentrated. It's like there's a lot of all these like philosophical high ideas can be kind of like compressed, and it is kind of sigil-like, right? I mean, it's like this sort of like it's an attractor, you know. Yeah. Although maybe it's a little bit more intellectual, a little bit more articulated, a little bit more rational than an actual sigil, but it has that sort of concentrated form, right? It's invested.
You're like folding it up, and
yes.
I think it's really necessary to operate on all levels of like literacy. So I'm really interested in just creating more lures for people to say, oh, what's that? Like, I'm gonna go read about it. Oh, watch
lures,
yes, and I think it's what people need. I think that, you know, when we're talking about like a kind of grand historical narratives or whatever, the thing that constantly people forget is that this whole thing where there's any amount of universal literacy amongst any population is extremely new. So when people are like, oh, you know, history has been recorded for so long, and it's like, yeah, it's been recorded without anybody to read it. And no one to collate it, no one to fact check, no one to interact with it at all until about 100 years ago. And the idea that like normal people, even normal poor people, could have the tools in hand to access things that had been recorded from 1,000 years ago just was not an option.
Yeah, that's what you keep talking about, the archive, you know, and it's very, I mean, like it's almost this mystical, I mean, or in a sense, I mean, just infinite, you know.
And it instantiates the existence of this as a thing at all. Like, it does not, I don't think we're anything. Like, I don't think history, people always talk about like, oh, like Francis Fukuyama, history didn't really end. Get like, you know, like fuck you. It's like, let's not talk about the end of history. Let's talk about the beginning of it. Because I don't think it begins until 100, 150 years ago. Like, I don't think history starts in a way that is legible to anyone as a narrative they can fit in their head until the last like 5 to 10 generations. And what's really fascinating about that to me is that you get these kind of like dumbass arguments that people like, you know, how people keep an idea that they had when they were 14 and they've never reevaluated it, so it's there forever. They'll say things like, oh, I just don't know why we still fight. Like, history keeps repeating itself. I don't know why we haven't learned our lesson. And it's like, these lessons have not even been legible.
Yeah,
for so long. Like, what we have been participating in over the last 150 years is the very first time we have touched the stove and recognized that it is hot. And this idea that we're so far along, we're getting long in the tooth, we are, we're at the end, is so wrong. Because realistically, we are at the very beginning of history. We are at the very beginning of every person being able to access information. And that's a weirdly like optimistic stance that I have. But it is one in which I believe that memes kind of accelerate this, because it allows you to parse through irony. It allows you to parse through the importance of reference. Pretension is very vital. It's very useful to, kind of totem pole over someone and say, oh, like, this is the thing you should be reading, numbnuts. And then like, what else would get someone to read?
No, I know what you mean.
What else could make, people do not read, and they have to be asked at some level to interact with ideas other than just like what's presented to them consistently in media, or like even amongst their friends. Like, you want to wonder how fascism propagates. Well, fascism's a very simple idea that I think most kids by 12 years old consider for a second. And like, you just need rigor. Like, it's literally just rigor. Like, it's so easy to just like go up to another person and be like, oh wait, now I don't know if people should be executed for not wearing seatbelts. I don't know if like that's the way we should handle that. It's very simple. And it's once again why I'm constantly trying to have people interact with each other in good faith or interact with memes. There's a downside to that though, which is memes can shift the Overton window, but also in order to have any platform there's a bittersweet aspect, which is that you can really find like what does well is really disheartening.
Yeah.
You can just, you can watch, like someone really like this joke is only funny to them because it's like, it barely relates to any idea. It's just like, oh, like you get it. These two guys hated each other.
Yeah. Well, there's different levels of just how rich a meme can be. But
if the memes do well, you can make other memes that, get people to read something else. And
I mean, it's just critique. I mean, it's just sort of this it's like rigorous, but sort of highly fragmented form of critique. I mean, that's why I gotta say, like 2016, I knew that Trump was gonna win based on just the meme situation, not because I was like cracking up at Pepe memes, like, oh, you can't deny. It wasn't so much that, but I was just like, these people were talking about meme magic, and I'm like, that's not only is that not crazy, but it's like so based just on like an occult level. Also, it's like, I was like, that's it. I mean, Trump's got it. I mean, that's,
When he's got it because you can do that. Like, you can do that with him. Like, it's so, imagine like every Biden meme that I've seen that's been positive has literally made me want to like throw up in my mouth.
Yeah, well, but that was itself a meme for a while. The left can't meme, I mean, that was a.
It's not just about like it's what are we choosing to meme about? Like, the left can meme when it's the left making fun of liberals.
Yes,
like we're really good at dunking on Hillary Clinton. We're great at like, but when I see someone say something like, "Hey, man, being bisexual means being attracted to both Kamala and Biden," I want to like, fucking like commit seppuku. Like,
no.
Is committing seppuku cultural appropriation or is it?
I'm not sure. Yeah. White.
I wonder if self-immolation is also.
Yeah, that's Asian. Pills in a bathtub is feminine, so I can't appropriate that. I think it's just hanging is the only cishet mask. Waiting or gun to the head. That's
totally.
Yeah, that's classic. Well, yeah, I think we're good, Xylon. I mean, we could go for a million hours, but this has been
good. I'm glad that it's the longest one you've ever done.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. There was so much. I can't believe we didn't even get to memes. I hope we address the concerns of just my like incorrigibly fascist fan base over here.
I love the beard, by the way. Like, I've been
likewise,
for a few years now, and I can't imagine going back at all.
I know, I'm so into it now. I love it.
It's great. Is it gray a little?
Oh, a little bit. Yeah. Look at this.
Rules. That's so good.
Well, yeah. I mean, Kirsten likes it. I don't. I don't know. I mean, I definitely
No,
this
it's no safety.
definitely quarantine has definitely been sort of like
Well,
fake. Just
I'm like 25, and
Yeah.
I couldn't even grow a beard until like 3 years ago, and no hair on my body is red except my beard.
yeah, these things
No.
you discover these things.
My
Yeah.
my dad is entirely a redhead, and I used to hate it because I thought it would come in like little bits and be red, and I'd be like, oh, this sucks, like it's
Yeah.
weird and patchy. But now I'm like super into it, and people ask me if I'm like a Viking. Like,
Yeah. No, you've got, dude. You switched haplogroups, man.
no, it's true. It's really. I mean, when you first met me, I was super twinky.
Yeah, you were kind of. Well, I don't know. You've always been kind of. I mean, strong man. So I don't know. I mean, were you twinky before? I don't.
I guess you know Richard Kamerman.
I do actually. Yeah.
Kamerman once called me a twunk.
A twank hunk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like moving into the like just hunk category, I hope.
Yeah. No,
this has been really good. Thank you for having me.
It's been great. Thank you so much for being on here, Xylon. I think people were feeling it too.
I'm glad.
Yeah. All right. And yeah, we'll talk about this. We'll talk about this mute presence. Everyone, look out for mute presence. Look out for. And is Death Pile the one that's currently music wise very active, or
me and the project I do is called Internecine.
Right. Lycanthrope was just for a while. Yeah, Internecine. Yeah,
early on, and so the main thing I do is called Internecine, and I have a few records out under that name. I do a lot of stuff. I have this like country thing I'm doing, and I don't know. I'm constantly like just making shit. But yeah, this is really good, and I'm sure we'll keep people informed of whatever we're both up to.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool.
All right.
Take care.
Well, Zai. Talk soon.
Take care.
There you have it. Xylon Genesis Otterburn. Yeah, as far as what's next, I don't have the next guest booked, but she's almost booked. Need to get more women in here. Yeah, that's I'm not a quotas guy, but I am a multiple perspectives guy, and we're gonna need some more straight up female perspectives. So those will be the next couple of guests, I think. But yeah, memes, sigils, noise, communism. I think we got it down. Thanks to everyone for listening, and we'll check you out next time.